She had dedicated her life to loving her family. But as her eyes began to dim, as darkness truly began to engulf her world day by day, the son she had given birth to, raised, sacrificed everything for, told her, "I don't have any money." Meanwhile, he had just bought a new vacation home. This is the story of an aging mother, a treacherous son, and an adopted son who did what his own flesh and blood couldn't. If you haven't subscribed yet, hit the subscribe button now so you don't miss heartwarming stories like this. Like and comment with the city or country you're watching to let me know where in the world my story has reached. Now, let's begin. I don't know exactly when my children stopped seeing me. Not the dramatic moment when everything fell apart. I mean, the slow, quiet erosion that happened long before any of that. The way a family can share holidays and birthday dinners and Sunday phone calls, and still somehow, one by one, begin to look right through the person sitting at the head of the table. I think about that a lot now. I think about how invisible I had already become before the moment that finally forced me to see it clearly. My name is Evelyn Carter. I am 72 years old. I live in a white house on the corner of Maple and 4th in a small Ohio town called Grover Falls, a place so unremarkable that people who grew up here either leave the moment they graduate high school or stay forever without quite understanding why. I stayed. My husband Gerald stayed. We built a life here the way people used to build lives, slowly, with our hands, with long stretches of patience, with the understanding that the things worth keeping were worth working for. Gerald passed 4 years ago, pancreatic cancer, which is exactly the kind of disease that gives you almost no warning and very little time. He was diagnosed in October and gone by February. That winter was the hardest thing I've ever survived, and I mean that word carefully. Survived, the way you survive a flood or a fire, the way you crawl out from the wreckage and stand in the smoke and take inventory of what is left. What was left was the house, a modest savings account, some investments Gerald had set up quietly over the years, more than I had realized at the time, and my children, Michael, who was 44 and lived 40 minutes away in Columbus, and Lily, who was 38 and not my child by blood, but by every other measure that has ever mattered to me. I should tell you about my life before I tell you about what happened, because what happened only makes sense if you understand the kind of woman I had spent 7 decades trying to be. I was a school teacher for 31 years, 4th grade. I cannot tell you how many children sat in my classroom over those decades, how many book reports I graded at the kitchen table after dinner, how many parent-teacher conferences I sat through, how many times I bought school supplies out of my own pocket for kids whose families couldn't afford them. I did it because I believed, I still believe even now, the children deserve someone in their corner, that the world is a better place when people choose to show up for each other. I showed up for Michael from the moment he was born. I breastfed him through 3 ear infections and a bout of croup that had Gerald and me taking turns holding him upright through the night so he could breathe. I drove him to soccer practice every Saturday for 6 years, even though I hate the cold, and Ohio in November is the kind of cold that settles into your bones and doesn't leave until April. I paid for his college, Gerald and I together, worked extra in the summers so he wouldn't graduate with debt. When he married Sandra, I welcomed her the way I had hoped someone would welcome my child, with open arms, with no conditions attached. And I showed up for Lily in a different way, but no less completely. Lily came to us when she was 14. She had been in the foster system for 3 years at that point, shuffled between placements, and she arrived at our house on a Tuesday evening in March with everything she owned in a black garbage bag and a look on her face like she was already preparing herself to leave. I had seen that look before, in my classroom, the children who had been disappointed so many times that hope had started to feel like a trap. I recognized it in Lily immediately. I did not make promises to her right away because I understood that promises from adults meant very little to her at that point. What I did instead was show up every single day. I made dinner. I asked her about her day without pushing when she didn't want to answer. I went to her school meetings. I learned that she liked mystery novels and hated mushrooms and had a habit of falling asleep on the couch with the television on. And instead of waking her up and sending her to her room, I covered her with the blanket from the back of the sofa and let her sleep. It took a long time, nearly a year before she started to trust us, longer before she called me Mom, and when she finally did, she said it quietly, almost like she was testing the word in her mouth, seeing if it would break something. It didn't break anything. It built something instead. Gerald and I formally adopted Lily when she was 16. Michael was 22 by then, already in college, and he accepted the news with the mild, distracted generosity of a young man who was too focused on his own life to pay much attention to what was happening at home. He was cordial to Lily, in the distant, slightly stiff way that you are cordial to a cousin you only see at Thanksgiving. Not unkind, simply absent in a way that is harder to name than cruelty. The trouble with Michael is that he was never cruel in any obvious way. He called on my birthday. He came to Christmas dinner most years. When Gerald was dying, he visited the hospital twice and stood by the bed with his hands in his pockets and said the right things in a flat voice. And I told myself that people grieve differently, that it was enough that he was there. I made excuses for him the way mothers do, the way we press our thumb over the crack in the porcelain and tell ourselves it isn't really broken. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me tell you about the spring, about the month everything changed, about the morning I sat in Dr. Haskins' office and heard words I was not prepared for. It started with floaters. If you have never had them, floaters are exactly what they sound like. Small dark shapes that drift across your field of vision like shadows of shadows. I had noticed them for a few months before I finally mentioned them to my regular doctor during a routine visit in February. She referred me to an ophthalmologist. I wasn't worried. I was 72 years old. Strange things happen to bodies at 72, and most of them turn out to be nothing. Dr. Haskins was a quiet, careful man in his 50s who examined my eyes with the kind of focused attention that, in retrospect, I should have recognized as concern. He had me come back twice before he sat me down in his office. Not the exam room, his actual office, with the diplomas on the wall and the photographs of his family, and told me what he had found. Tractional retinal detachment. The words landed in my chest like stones dropped into still water. He explained it carefully. The retina, the thin membrane at the back of the eye that processes everything you see, was being pulled away from its proper position. This had likely been developing for some time, worsened by the diabetes I had been managing for 8 years. If it progressed without intervention, the damage would become permanent. I could lose significant vision in my left eye, potentially most of it. There was a procedure, a vitreoretinal surgery. It needed to happen soon, not emergency room soon, but weeks, not months. And the upfront cost, after what my insurance would cover, was $4,000. $4,000. I sat in that office chair and looked at Dr. Haskins' diplomas and thought about all the things I had paid for in my life without hesitating. Michael's college tuition, Lily's first car, Gerald's funeral expenses, the furnace that died in 2019, the neighbor's kids' school fees one terrible year when their family couldn't manage. $4,000 was not an insurmountable sum in the abstract, but I was on a fixed income, and the savings account was reserved for what Gerald and I had always called the emergency fund, and I had promised myself I would not touch it unless there was absolutely no other way. I had not asked my children for money since Gerald died. I had not wanted to. Asking felt like the beginning of something, a shift in the balance, a signal that I was diminishing, that the woman who had always managed was starting to need managing herself. I hated that feeling more than I can express, but this was my eyesight. This was the thing that let me read, that let me see the faces of people I loved, that let me drive myself to the grocery store and watch the cardinals at the feeder in the backyard and do the crossword puzzle that Gerald and I used to do together every Sunday morning, the one small ritual I had kept alive because letting it go felt like losing another piece of him. So I called Michael. Okay, I want to be precise about this phone call because I have replayed it so many times since that I have worn it down to its essential shape. I called on a Thursday evening in early April. I had practiced what I was going to say, not a script, just a rough shape of the conversation, the key points so that I would not stumble. I was going to be calm. I was going to be clear. I was going to tell him about the diagnosis, explain the timeline, ask if he could lend me $4,000, and offer to pay him back over the next year from my monthly income. He picked up on the third ring. "Hey, Mom." He sounded distracted. I could hear the television in the background, some kind of sports program, the low roar of a crowd. "Michael, Is this a good time? Sure, yeah, what's up? I told him. I explained the floaters, the diagnosis, Dr. Haskins, the surgery. I kept my voice steady, which cost me more effort than he will ever know. I told him the number, $4,000, and I told him I would pay him back. There was a pause, not a long one, but the specific kind of pause that has a decision inside it. $4,000. He repeated the number back to me like he was checking to make sure he'd heard correctly. That's right, the insurance covers the rest, but they need the upfront payment before… Mom, He stopped. I heard him move somewhere, the background noise shifting, and I imagined him walking away from Sandra, stepping into another room. I don't know, we're kind of stretched right now. Stretched, I said. The word came out more flatly than I intended. Yeah, I mean, with the new place and everything. The new place, I said. And here's where I have to be honest with you, because this story is not about me being a perfect victim and Michael being a cardboard villain. The truth is messier than that. The truth is that I had known about the vacation property. Sandra had mentioned it in December, excited, that they had put a deposit on a lake house in southern Michigan. A place to take the kids in summer, she said. A good investment, Michael said, when he mentioned it briefly on New Year's. I had said congratulations and meant it, because I am his mother and his happiness matters to me, and at the time I had no reason to connect his vacation house to my medical expenses. But now, sitting in my kitchen with the phone pressed against my ear, listening to my son tell me he was stretched, I felt the connection snap into place with a clarity that was almost physical. The lake house had cost them something in the mid-200,000s. I didn't know the exact number, but I knew what a lake house in Michigan cost, and I knew what stretched meant when you chose to buy one. Michael, I said carefully, this is my eyesight. I'm not asking you to give me the money. I'm asking to borrow it. I know, Mom. I hear you. Sandra and I have been really trying to be careful right now, financially, and I don't think we can… You cannot lend your mother $4,000 so that she doesn't go blind. The silence that followed that sentence was different from the earlier pause, heavier. The kind of silence where both people know that something has been said that cannot be unsaid. That's not fair, he said. His voice had shifted, defensive now, with an edge underneath it. You're making it sound like I'm not making it sound like anything, Michael. I'm telling you what the situation is. The doctor says I need this surgery within the next few weeks, or there's a real chance I lose most of the vision in my left eye. I'm asking you to help me. Mom, we just can't right now. Maybe you should look into a payment plan with the hospital, or see if there's some kind of assistance program. I do not remember exactly what I said after that. I remember that my voice stayed even, which I am still a little proud of because instead I felt like the floor of the kitchen had cracked open underneath me. I remember saying something about understanding. I remember ending the call without saying anything that I could not take back, though there was plenty I wanted to say. I set the phone down on the kitchen table. I sat in the chair that had been Gerald's chair, the one closest to the window, and I looked at the backyard where the bird feeder hung on the post he had put in himself 20 years ago. A cardinal was there, red as a stoplight against the gray April sky. I sat with what I was feeling, which was not what I would have expected. Not rage, not grief exactly. Something quieter and colder than either of those things. The specific feeling of understanding something about a person that you had been not understanding for a very long time, something you had been actively choosing not to see, and now you were seeing it, and you couldn't go back. I stayed in that chair for a long time. The cardinal eventually flew away. The yard went gray and still. Inside the house, the refrigerator hummed and the clock on the wall ticked and the world went quietly on, indifferent to the fact that something in me had just broken and reset into a new shape, one I was going to have to learn to live inside. I did not cry. I want you to understand that, I did not cry, not that night. There would be time for that later, and it would come in unexpected waves, in the shower, in the car, once in the cereal aisle at the grocery store for reasons I still can't fully explain. But that night, sitting in Gerald's chair in the fading April light, I was simply and completely still. And in the stillness, for the first time, I let myself admit something I had been avoiding for years. My son and I were strangers who called each other family, and the distance between those two things, strangers and family, was exactly the size of $4,000 and one phone call that should have lasted longer than 3 minutes. I went to bed that night without eating dinner. I lay in the dark and I thought about all the things I had given over the course of my life, all the ways I had shown up, all the years of assuming that love was something that accumulated, that it built up like interest, that the investment you made in a person stored itself somewhere and waited for the moment you needed to draw from it. What a quiet, devastating thing it is to discover that you were wrong. I did not sleep well that night, or the several nights that followed. There's a specific quality to sleeplessness when you are 72 and living alone. It is not the restless, anxious insomnia of a younger person, the kind where your mind races and your body hums with nervous energy. It is quieter than that, and in some ways worse. You lie in the dark, and the house makes its sounds around you. The settling of old wood, the tick of the baseboard heaters, the distant sound of a car passing on 4th Street, and you are simply awake with your thoughts, no distraction available, nothing to do but lie there and think about the things you have been trying not to think about. I thought about Michael. I kept returning to his voice on the phone, not angry, not cold exactly, just that particular flatness that I had learned over the course of his adult life meant that a conversation had become inconvenient for him. I had heard that voice before, over small things, when I called at a bad time, when I asked about something that required more attention than he wanted to give. I had always found a way to explain it away. He was busy. He was stressed. He was a man with a demanding job and a wife and 2 children and a life that moved faster than mine did. But you can only explain things away for so long before the explanations start to feel like lies you are telling yourself. On the 3rd morning after the phone call, I got up early and sat at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee and a legal pad, and I wrote down my options. It is something Gerald used to do whenever we faced a problem that felt too large. Write it down, make it concrete, take it out of your head where it can get tangled up in emotion, and put it on paper where it has to behave like a fact. I had always found the habit more his than mine, but I was desperate enough to try anything. Option 1. Pay from the emergency fund. Gerald and I had spent years building that account, adding to it methodically, treating it as something sacred. We had always agreed it was for a true emergency. I sat there with my coffee going cold and thought, well, what is this, if not that? But something in me resisted. The emergency fund was the last thing I had that felt fully mine, fully under my control, and spending it felt like surrendering a piece of ground I could not afford to lose. Option 2. A payment plan with the hospital. Michael had suggested it, and I had not been able to hear the suggestion charitably in the moment, but I sat with it now and tried to be fair. I called the billing office at the medical center the next morning. They were kind on the phone. They explained that a payment plan was possible, but the surgery itself could not be scheduled until the initial deposit, a minimum of $1,500, was secured. $1,500 was more manageable, but it would still take time to arrange, and Dr. Haskins had said weeks, not months. Option 3. Lily. I almost did not write it down, not because it hadn't occurred to me. It had, immediately, that first night, but because something in me resisted the idea in a way I could not immediately explain. I sat with that resistance for a while, turning it over, and eventually I understood what it was. I did not want to put that weight on her. Not because I doubted her, I doubted myself. I was afraid that calling Lily would feel like I was reaching for her because my blood had failed me, that it would make our relationship into something transactional, a backup plan, a fallback. Lily deserved better than to be someone's second call, and beyond that there was something older and more tangled underneath it, a voice that sounded uncomfortably like pride telling me that I should not need anyone, that the woman who had always provided and protected should not become the woman with her hand out. I hated that voice. I recognized it as the kind of thinking that gets people hurt when they are too stubborn to accept help. But recognizing a thing and escaping it are 2 different operations, and I was still working on the second one. What settled the matter for me was not a decision, exactly. It was a memory. Lily was 16, maybe a few months into living with us. She had come home from school one afternoon quieter than usual, and I had noticed but not pushed, the way I had learned not to push with her. After dinner, she had helped me clear the table. She always helped, even when she didn't have to, which I had come to understand was its own kind of language. And when we were standing at the sink together, she had said, without looking at me, "Can I tell you something?" I said yes. She told me about a girl at school who had been making her life difficult. Not dramatic bullying, nothing that would show up in a disciplinary report, just the low-grade cruelty that teenage girls are sometimes capable of. The exclusions, the comments just loud enough to be heard, the particular social architecture of humiliation that leaves no visible marks. She told me about it in a flat, controlled voice, the way she told most things, keeping the emotion buttoned down. But her hands were shaking slightly as she dried the plates. When she finished, I didn't offer solutions. I didn't say, "Have you tried talking to a teacher?" or "Ignore her and she'll stop." I just said, That sounds exhausting. I'm sorry you're dealing with it." And she looked at me with an expression I still think about sometimes, a kind of startled relief, like she had been bracing for advice and received something she hadn't expected instead. She nodded. We finished the dishes. Later that night, she knocked on the bedroom door and said goodnight. And there was something slightly different in the way she said it, a fraction warmer, a hair less guarded. That was the moment, I think. Not the adoption papers, not the first time she called me mom, not any of the bigger ceremonies. That small moment at the sink when I had nothing to offer except my presence, and I offered it anyway. I thought about that moment on the fourth morning after Michael's phone call, and then I picked up the phone and called Lily. She picked up on the second ring, which she almost always did. Lily had a habit of keeping her phone close, something I had noticed years ago and attributed to the instinct of someone who had spent years not knowing when the next important call would come. "Mom." "Hey." Her voice was warm and a little rushed. She was at work, I could tell from the background sounds, the beeping of monitors, the low murmur of a busy hospital floor. She was a nurse at Mercy Regional in Columbus, had been for going on 12 years. Good at it, from everything I had seen. The kind of nurse who remembered details about patients and followed up on things that weren't technically her responsibility to follow up on. "Is this a bad time?" I asked. "Give me 1 second." I heard her step somewhere quieter. "Okay, what's up? You okay?" And I told her. The same story I had told Michael, the same diagnosis, the same number. But where Michael's silence had been a decision closing like a door, Lily's silence was something different, active, listening, the specific quiet of a person absorbing information so they can respond to it properly. When I finished, she said, "How long has this been going on? The floaters, I mean." "A few months. I mentioned them to Dr. Hendricks in February, and she referred me to Chess." "A few months." Her voice was careful now. "Mom, why didn't you tell me sooner?" "Because I didn't want to worry you." "Because you didn't want to worry me," she repeated, and I could hear the particular mix of exasperation and tenderness in her voice that I had come to associate with the moments when I frustrated her by trying to protect her from things. "Okay, and what does Dr. Haskins say about the timeline?" "He wants to schedule within the next 2 to 3 weeks. The upfront cost is $4,000. A pause. Shorter than Michael's. Then, "Okay, I'll be there Friday." "Lily, I'm not asking you to—" "I know you're not asking me. I'm telling you I'll be there Friday. Is the morning okay? I can switch my shifts around." I opened my mouth to argue with her and then closed it again, because I suddenly did not have the energy for the argument, and because some part of me, the part that had been sitting in Gerald's chair in the gray light 3 nights ago, feeling the cold weight of understanding settle in, that part recognized that accepting help was not the same as admitting defeat. It was just harder to believe that at 72 than it should have been. "Morning is fine," I said. "Good. I'll call you when I'm on my way. And Mom, don't touch the emergency fund, okay? Just wait until Friday." I didn't ask her how she knew about the emergency fund. I had mentioned it to her years ago. One of those small domestic details you share with someone who has become genuinely part of your life. The fact that she had retained it, that it was stored somewhere in her understanding of me, was its own small measure of something. "Okay," I said. "Okay," she said. And then before she hung up, "I love you." 3 words. I have heard them thousands of times in my life. From Gerald, from Michael when he was young, from Lily in the years since she finally let herself say them easily. But something about those three words, in that particular moment, with the kitchen quiet around me and the April light coming through the window, hit me somewhere deep and undefended, and I had to press my free hand against the table and breathe for a moment after she hung up. I did not cry. I did not allow myself that yet. But I sat there for a long time after the call ended, my hand still pressed flat on the kitchen table, and I thought about how strange it is that the same three words can feel so different depending on who says them and what is inside them when they do. Lily arrived Friday morning at 9:45, which I knew because I had been up since 6 and had been watching the window with an attention I recognized as slightly ridiculous and did not apologize for. She drove a dark blue Honda that had seen better days. She had mentioned in the fall that one of the back windows had a slow leak she hadn't gotten around to fixing. The car pulled up in front of the house, and she climbed out carrying a canvas tote bag and a paper bag from the coffee place on Millfield Avenue, the one we both liked, which meant she had gone out of her way to stop there before coming. That detail undid me a little. The coffee. The deliberate small act of knowing what I liked and going to get it before she came. I had to take a breath at the kitchen window before I went to open the door. She looked tired. That was the first thing I noticed when she came inside. The particular exhaustion of a nurse who has been working back-to-back shifts, the kind that sits around the eyes and in the set of the shoulders. She had probably traded days off to clear Friday, which meant she had worked extra to cover it, which meant she had given me not just money, but time and sleep and the physical cost of rearranging her life. I didn't say any of that. She would have deflected it. "You look good," she said, setting the bag down on the kitchen counter and hugging me. She was careful with the hug. She had always been physically careful with me since I turned 70, the way people are with things they are afraid of breaking, which I found both touching and faintly irritating. I hugged her back harder than she expected and felt her laugh a little against my shoulder. "I look like a woman who hasn't been sleeping well," I said, "but thank you." "Well, you look like that woman, but with good bone structure." She pulled back and handed me a coffee cup from the bag. "Flat white, extra shot. Don't tell me you've given up caffeine." "I've given up plenty of things. Caffeine is not one of them." We sat at the kitchen table, the same table where I had made my list 4 days earlier, where I had sat through that phone call with Michael, where Gerald and I had eaten 30 years of breakfast. And we drank our coffee and talked the way Lily and I talked when things were serious, which was carefully and without performing. No pretending it was fine. No filling the air with reassurance that neither of us had earned yet. She asked about the diagnosis in clinical detail because that was her training and also her way of loving us, understanding the facts of a situation as completely as possible before addressing the feelings inside them. I showed her the paperwork from Dr. Haskins' office. She read it with the focused attention I had seen her give to medical documents before, the slight narrowing of the eyes, the way her hand moved to turn the page before she'd quite finished the paragraph she was on. "Tractional detachment," she said, not quite to me. "From the diabetic retinopathy." "That's what he said." "How's your vision right now? In that eye?" "Blurry in the lower field, some flashing occasionally." She looked up from the paperwork with an expression I could not quite name. Concern? Yes, but something else underneath it. A calculation, or perhaps a conclusion. "Okay," she said. "This needs to happen fast. He's right about that." "I know." "Did you call the surgeon's office to ask about a date?" "I called on Tuesday. They said they could schedule me for the last week of April if the deposit is cleared." She nodded. She set the paperwork down and picked up her coffee and looked at me over the rim of the cup with an expression that reminded me, with a sudden and almost physical force, of the expression she had worn at 16 when she was trying to decide whether to trust something. She had been a careful child in the way that children are careful when they have been burned. She checked things twice, waited longer than most people before concluding something was safe. She had carried that caution into adulthood, refined it into a kind of precise attentiveness that made her good at her job and good, I had always thought, at the harder parts of being human. "Mom," she said, "can I ask you something?" "Of course." "Did you call Michael first?" The question sat between us on the table. I met her eyes. "Yes," I said. She nodded slowly, as if this confirmed something she had already suspected. She didn't ask what happened. She didn't need to. She knew Michael in the distant observational way that people know someone they have shared a peripheral space with for years. And she had her own conclusions about him, which she had always kept mostly to herself out of a consideration for my feelings that I had always found more generous than I deserved. "Okay," she said. That was all. Just, okay. She reached into her canvas tote bag and took out a checkbook. Old-fashioned, I know. Lily still used checks for certain things, a habit she had developed early and kept. She uncapped a pen, wrote in the date, and then paused with the pen over the amount line and looked up at me. 4,000, she said. Lily. Mom, 4,000? Yes, I said, but I want to pay you back. I can do 500 a month starting in. You're not paying me back, she said. She said it pleasantly, but with a finality that did not invite argument. She wrote the amount. She wrote my name on the payee line. She tore the check carefully along the perforation and set it on the table in front of me, face up, the way you set something down when you want a person to be able to look at it without having to reach for it. I looked at it. $4,000. Written in Lily's precise handwriting, the numbers neat and slightly compressed, the signature at the bottom the one she'd developed in her 20s. Nothing like the careful, rounded printing she'd used as a teenager. Lily. My voice came out wrong. I had not planned for my voice to do that. Don't, she said gently. Don't make it into something bigger than it is. You needed help. I'm here. That's the whole story. It's not the whole story, I said. It's... Mom. She reached across the table and covered my hand with hers. Her hand was warm and slightly rough, in the way that nurses' hands get from constant washing, and I was suddenly overwhelmingly aware of how much of a life was contained in that hand. All the years she had spent learning to trust, all the ways she had been failed before she found us, all the distance she had traveled from the girl with the garbage bag to the woman sitting across from me now. You and Dad took me in when I had nothing. You fed me and fought for me and showed up every single time, even when I was terrible and angry, and made it as hard as I possibly could. You never once made me feel like I was on probation. You just loved me, like it wasn't even a question. My throat had closed in a way that made speech difficult. I pressed her hand back. This is not a debt, she said. I'm not doing this because I owe you. I'm doing it because you're my mother, and you need help, and I am in a position to help you. That's what family does. That's what you taught me family does. She paused. Even if not everyone got the same lesson. The last sentence she said quietly, without emphasis, and yet it landed with more weight than if she had shouted it. She was not performing bitterness. She was just noting a fact, the way a person notes a fact when it has been made inescapable. I did not respond to it directly. I didn't think she expected me to. What I said instead was, you need to know that I see you. What you did here today, I see it. She nodded. She took her hand back and picked up her coffee and looked out the kitchen window at the backyard. After a moment, she said, Is that the same bird feeder? Gerald put that post in 2003. I know. I remember when he did it. She smiled at the window, small and private. He let me help him mix the concrete. I was terrible at it. He said you were a natural. He lied constantly about things like that, she said, and the smile was still there, and there was grief in it, the kind that has been worn down to something bearable by time. It's one of the things I miss most about him. We sat with that for a moment. The morning light shifted. A cardinal appeared at the feeder, possibly the same one I had watched from Gerald's chair the week before, though I knew I couldn't know that for certain. I need to call Dr. Haskins' office, I said. Do it now, I'll wait. I called. The receptionist was warm and efficient and said she would transfer me to the surgery scheduling line, and there was a hold, and then a woman named Patricia asked me to confirm my date of birth and insurance information, and when I told her I could clear the deposit within the week, she began pulling up the schedule. I sat at my kitchen table with Lily across from me and the check in front of me, and I listened to Patricia move through dates. April 28th, she said. Was that okay? That was 11 days away. I said yes. I set the phone down and looked at Lily. April 28th, I said. Good, she said. I'll take the day off. I'll drive you. You don't have to do that. I know I don't have to. I'm going to. She looked at me with a steadiness that I recognized, with a slight start, as something I had once looked like myself. The particular expression of someone who has decided on a course of action and is simply waiting for the other person to catch up. "You're not going into surgery alone, Mom. I don't care how routine they say it is. You're not sitting in that waiting room alone, and you're not being driven home alone." I did not argue. The argument would have been dishonest anyway. The truth was that the thought of going alone had been sitting heavy in me since the appointment with Dr. Haskins, that cold, practical fact of being a woman who lived alone and had no one to drive her home from a procedure. And I had been pushing it aside without fully acknowledging it, because acknowledging it required acknowledging how thin the ground had gotten. "Okay," I said. "Thank you." "Don't thank me," she said, for what was probably the third time that morning. "Drink your coffee. It's getting cold." Uhit. The week before the surgery was strange in a way I find difficult to describe precisely. On the surface, nothing much happened. I deposited the check, called Patricia back to confirm, had a preoperative appointment with Dr. Haskins and his team, did the things you do in the days before a medical procedure. I followed the instructions they gave me. I arranged for my neighbor Helen to water the plants if something unexpected happened, which I told her was just precautionary, which she pretended to believe. But underneath the ordinary surface of those days, something was shifting. I felt it the way you feel a change in weather before it arrives. In the quality of the air, in some pressure you can't locate but can't ignore. Part of it was the impending surgery, the physical vulnerability of what was about to happen. I am not a person who is afraid of medical procedures, generally. I have had my share of them over the years, and I have developed a practical relationship with the machinery of modern medicine. Respect without terror, mostly. But there is a specific kind of fear that comes with anything involving your eyes, your sight, the precise faculty by which you perceive the world. And I would be dishonest if I claimed I felt nothing in the nights leading up to the 28th. I thought about what it would mean to lose it. The vision in my left eye, partially or fully. I thought about books. I have always been a reader, have been since my mother put a library card in my hand at the age of 6. And I thought about whether I would be able to read. I thought about the crossword puzzle, which I had kept doing every Sunday with a pen, because Gerald had always done his in pen, and I had never been able to use a pencil for it after he died without feeling like something was wrong. I thought about the cardinal at the feeder. Small things. The small things that constitute a life. But the other thing shifting in me that week was less about the surgery and more about everything the surgery had revealed. The phone call with Michael had cracked something open, and now that it was open, I found I could not close it again. I kept thinking about his voice, the flatness of it, the way he had offered alternatives, payment plans, assistance programs, in a tone that was helpful on the surface and dismissive just below it, the tone of someone who has already made a decision and is performing consideration as a formality. I thought about Sandra, Michael's wife. We had always had a relationship that was cordial and careful, the kind of relationship where you learn the outlines of each other without ever quite getting to the interior. I thought about the lake house in Michigan. I thought about what it meant that he could make that purchase, could absorb that purchase into his financial life. The way you absorb a large expense when you have chosen it, when it is something you want. And then tell me that $4,000 was impossible. I was not naive. I understood that financial pictures are complicated, that having a mortgage on a vacation property is not the same as having cash available, that the two things can coexist in a budget in ways that are genuinely constraining. I had tried to apply that understanding generously, the way I always tried to apply understanding generously to Michael. But $4,000, for his mother's eye. There's a point at which generous understanding becomes something else, becomes a way of protecting a person from the consequences of who they are, of allowing a comfortable lie to stand because the truth is too uncomfortable to sit with. I had been protecting Michael from that truth for a long time. I could feel, in that week before the surgery, that I was reaching the end of my capacity for it. Lily called every evening that week. Not long calls. She was working, and I knew she was tired. But she called, the way she always had when she knew something was weighing on me. We talked about nothing important mostly. A patient she had who had finally been moved out of the ICU after 3 weeks, a problem with her apartment building's heating system that the landlord was taking his time addressing, A novel she had started reading and wasn't sure about yet. Normal things. The texture of a normal life. On the night before the surgery, she called later than usual, around 10. I was already in bed, not sleeping, doing that specific lying awake in the dark thing I had become practiced at over the past weeks. "Can't sleep?" she said by way of hello. "Getting there," I said, which was not true. Liar. But she said it warmly. "I'll pick you up at 7:15, okay? The parking at Mercy Regional is terrible and I want to give us time." 7:15 is fine. A pause. I could hear her breathing on the other end of the line, which I found, absurdly, comforting. The simple evidence of another person present in the dark. "You're going to be okay," she said. Not as a reassurance exactly, more as a statement of what she believed to be true. Lily did not make promises she wasn't certain she could keep. That was something else she had come to slowly, the difference between empty reassurance and genuine conviction. When she said "you're going to be okay," she meant it the way a nurse means it, with the weight of clinical understanding behind it. "I know," I said. "Try to sleep a little." "I'll try." "I love you, Mom." "I love you," I said. "Drive carefully in the morning." She hung up, and I lay in the dark, and the house made its sounds around me, and eventually, sometime well after midnight, I slept. She was there at 7:12. 3 minutes early, because that was Lily. She was always either exactly on time or slightly ahead of it, never late, a habit she had developed in the years when being on time was the only form of control available to her. I came out to the car with my overnight bag, just in case, and she took it from me without being asked and put it in the back seat. I got in the passenger side. The window on the driver's side had a gap where the seal had worn, just as she had mentioned in the fall, and the morning air came in cold and thin. She handed me a coffee from the same place on Millfield Avenue. I did not say anything. I held the cup in both hands and looked out the windshield at the morning, at the street where I had lived for 40 years, at the bird feeder post visible in the side yard, and I thought, this is what it looks like. This is what it actually looks like when someone loves you. Not the proclamations, not the names on legal documents, not the phone calls on birthdays that feel more like obligations than choices. This, the window with the gap in the seal, the 3 minutes early. The coffee from the right place, gotten on purpose, brought without being asked. The small, deliberate acts of a person who has decided you matter. We drove to Mercy Regional in the early morning light, and I held my coffee and did not speak much, and Lily drove with one hand on the wheel and the radio on low, and it was, in some way that I could not have anticipated, one of the most peaceful mornings I had spent in a very long time, even knowing what was coming, even with the fear still there, a small cold stone in my chest, because I was not going through it alone. And at 72 years old, after everything, that was not a small thing. That was everything. The surgery took 4 hours and 11 minutes. I know the exact time because Lily told me afterward, the way she told me most things. Precisely, without softening the detail. Because she understood that I preferred the truth of a thing to a comfortable approximation of it. She had sat in the surgical waiting area for all 4 hours and 11 minutes, which I did not find out until later, when I asked if she had gone to get lunch, and she said she hadn't wanted to leave in case someone came out to update her. She had eaten a granola bar from her bag and read 40 pages of the novel she wasn't sure about yet, and sat in a plastic chair that she described as designed by someone who had never experienced the concept of a lower back. I was not aware of any of this while it was happening. I was under general anesthesia, which is its own specific kind of not being, not sleep, not unconsciousness in any familiar sense, but a complete and total absence that you don't experience as absence because you are not there to experience it. You go under and then you come back, and the time between is nothing, a clean white nothing. And the first thing I was aware of when I came back was a voice asking me my name and whether I knew where I was. I said my name. I said I was at Mercy Regional Hospital in Columbus, Ohio. The voice, a young man I thought, though I couldn't see clearly yet, said that was right, that I had done great, that Dr. Haskins was very pleased with how the procedure went. I asked about my eye. He said it looked good. He said Dr. Haskins would come speak with me soon. I lay in the recovery area and waited, which is the thing you do when there is nothing else you can do, and I was aware of a dull, pressing discomfort around my left eye. Not pain exactly, or not yet, the anesthesia still doing its work. And I was aware that I could not see clearly from that eye, which I understood was expected, which did not prevent me from lying there with a cold thread of fear in my chest until Dr. Haskins appeared beside the bed. He was a calm man. I had noted that in our consultations, and I noted it again now. The specific practiced calm of a surgeon who has delivered many different kinds of news in recovery rooms and has learned that how you carry your face matters. His face, coming around the curtain, was carrying something neutral but not grim, and I exhaled before he said a word. "Mrs. Carter," he said, "everything went well." He explained what he had done in terms I largely followed. The vitreous gel had been removed and replaced. The retina had been reattached. There was a gas bubble in my eye now that would gradually dissolve over several weeks, which was normal and necessary and would cause some visual disturbance in the meantime. I would need to keep my head in a specific position for several days to allow the retina to heal properly. I could not fly. I could not do anything strenuous. I needed to return in 1 week for a follow-up. "What's the long-term prognosis?" I asked. My voice was rougher than usual from the breathing tube. "Good," he said. "We caught it at the right time. There may be some permanent change in your visual acuity in that eye that we won't know fully for a few months, but the risk of significant vision loss has been substantially addressed." He paused. "You were right to come in when you did." I thought about the weeks between noticing the floaters and finally making the appointment. I thought about how much longer it might have been without the nudge of deteriorating symptoms. I thought about $4,000 and what it had bought, which was not just the surgery itself, but the months and years of seeing that lay on the other side of it. And I felt, very briefly and very clearly, a specific kind of fury at the casualness with which that amount had been declined. I let it pass. There was time for that later. What I said to Dr. Haskins was, "Thank you." They brought Lily back to the recovery area a few minutes after that. She came through the curtain still wearing her jacket, bag over her shoulder, the novel tucked under her arm, and she looked at me with the particular expression that I recognized from years of watching her assess situations. The quick scan, the inventory, the small settling of tension in her shoulders when the inventory came back acceptable. "Hey," she said, "how do you feel?" "Like someone operated on my eye," I said. "That's accurate." She pulled a chair up to the side of the bed without being asked. "Doctor Haskins came out and updated me. He said it went well." "He said the same to me." "Good." She set her bag down and looked at me. Her face was tired in a way that had deepened since the morning, the particular tiredness of sustained vigilance, of waiting for news while trying not to catastrophize. "I'm glad," she said simply. "You should have eaten something," I said. "You didn't have to stay the whole time." "I know." "Lily, Mom." She gave me the look, the one that meant the conversation on this particular topic was finished. "Do you want water? They said you can have water." I said yes. She got the water. We did not discuss her having stayed the whole time again because we were both people who understood when an argument was already over. Listen, she drove me home that afternoon with strict instructions from the nursing staff about head positioning, activity restrictions, and follow-up care. I sat in the passenger seat of her car with the protective eye shield taped over my left eye, watching the familiar streets of Columbus give way to the highway and then to the smaller roads that led back to Grover Falls. And I felt the specific, slightly unreal exhaustion that comes after anesthesia. Not tired in any normal sense, but hollowed out, like something essential had been temporarily removed and not quite fully replaced. Lily stayed 2 nights. She slept in the guest room, which I had kept made up since Gerald died, as though the permanence of an empty-made bed was less final than stripping it. She made meals that were simple and did not require me to do anything with my head that I wasn't supposed to do, and she administered my eye drops on the schedule the hospital had provided, which she had photographed and saved to her phone, and also written out by hand on a note card she left taped to the bathroom mirror. She went home Sunday evening. Before she left, she stood in the front doorway with her bag over her shoulder and looked at me with that steady, assessing expression. "Call me," she said. "If anything changes with the vision, if there's pain above a 4, If you feel nauseous, if anything feels wrong, I will call you, I said. Promise me. Lily, I promise. She nodded. She hugged me again, more carefully than usual because of the eye, and I held on to her for a moment longer than I needed to, and she let me. Then she walked down the front steps to her car with the gap in the windowsill, and I stood in the doorway and watched her go. And when her taillights disappeared around the corner of 4th Street, I went inside and sat in Gerald's chair and let myself be alone with everything I was feeling. It was quiet. The house was its usual evening self. The settling sounds, the refrigerator hum, the clock. I sat in the chair and I looked at the room, the familiar walls and furniture, Gerald's books still on the shelf in the order he had left them, because I had never been able to bring myself to rearrange them. The photograph on the mantel of the 4 of us at Lily's college graduation, Gerald with his arm around her, and both of them grinning like they had done something outrageous. I sat there for a long time. And then, for reasons I cannot entirely explain, some confluence of the surgery and the weeks preceding it, and Lily's face in the recovery room and the particular quiet of the house on a Sunday evening, I got up and went to the spare bedroom closet. At the back of the closet, behind the extra blankets and the box of Christmas ornaments, and the bin of old photographs I had been meaning to organize for years, was a banker's box. Gray cardboard, the lid held on by a thick rubber band that had lost most of its elasticity. Gerald's handwriting on the side in black marker. Estate/financial. Do not discard. I had known the box was there. I had known roughly what was in it. Documents, legal papers, financial records. Because Gerald had shown it to me years before, during one of the several conversations we'd had about what would happen if something happened to him. The kind of conversations that are uncomfortable and necessary and that most people put off for too long. We had had ours relatively early, in our late 50s, because Gerald was practical in the way that people who grew up without much tend to be practical about the things they have managed to accumulate. He had shown me the box. He had said, "Everything important is in here, organized by category, and if anything happens to me, you call Henderson first." Henderson was the attorney who had drawn up their wills, a quiet man in his 60s who ran a small firm downtown. I had nodded and said I hoped we wouldn't need it for a long time, and Gerald had said me too, and then we had gone back downstairs and made dinner and not spoken of it again for several years. After he died, I had opened the box once, just once, in those first raw weeks when I had needed the will to give to Henderson to begin the process of settling the estate. I had taken the will from its labeled folder and closed the box and put it back in the closet, and had not opened it again. Now, on a Sunday evening in early May, with a gas bubble in my left eye and a clarity about my life that felt recent and slightly brutal, I carried the box to the kitchen table and sat down with it. I did not have a specific intention. I think I just needed to understand, more completely than I currently did, the shape of my own life. What Gerald had left. What I actually had. Because somewhere in the weeks since Michael's phone call, I had begun to feel that I was operating with an incomplete picture of my own circumstances, and the incompleteness bothered me in a way it hadn't before. I took the lid off the box and looked at what was inside. Gerald had organized it in labeled manila folders, the way he organized everything, alphabetically, with a typed index card inside the lid listing each folder's contents and location. I looked at the index card first. Wills, both. Power of attorney documents, property records, investment account statements, insurance policies, the deed to the house, a folder labeled trusts that I had not previously paid much attention to. I pulled the trust folder first. I read slowly because legal language requires patience even when you are not recovering from eye surgery, and because I wanted to understand what I was reading rather than skim past the parts that confused me. What I found, over the next hour, sitting at the kitchen table under the kitchen light with a cup of tea going cold beside me, was information that reorganized my understanding of my own finances in ways I had not anticipated. Gerald had been more methodical than I had known. The investments, accounts I had understood to exist but had not examined in detail, had grown substantially over the years since Gerald had opened them. He had contributed consistently, reinvested dividends, made choices that I had trusted him to make, without looking over his shoulder, because that was the division of labor we had settled into, and I had not questioned it. I had thought of us as comfortable, secure. What I discovered that evening was that we were more than comfortable, significantly more. I sat with that for a while. I am not going to give you the exact number because it is mine and I do not owe it to anyone, but I will tell you that it was substantially more than I had believed, and that the discovery landed with a strange doubling of feeling, relief and unease arriving simultaneously, the way they do when you realize that a situation you had understood one way was actually something else entirely. The unease, when I examined it, came from a specific place. I turned to the Power of Attorney folder next. Gerald and I had set up durable powers of attorney in our late 50s. At the same time, we had done the wills. It was standard estate planning, the kind of thing a responsible couple does when they begin to take seriously the question of what happens if one or both of them becomes incapacitated. The documents named who would have the legal authority to make medical and financial decisions on my behalf if I became unable to make them myself. Gerald had been my agent, first. That was obvious. Spouses name each other first. But Gerald was gone, and there was a successor agent named in the document, the person who would step into that role if Gerald could not. I looked at the name on the line, Michael Gerald Carter. I sat very still. I had known this. I had known it the way you know things that were decided long ago, in a different chapter of your life, when the decision made sense without question and was filed away with all the other sensible decisions and not revisited because there had been no reason to revisit it. Michael was our son. Of course, Michael was the successor agent. Who else would it have been 15 years ago when these documents were drawn up? Lily hadn't even been with us a year at that point. The decision had been automatic. But I was not in 15 years ago. I was in now. And now was a place where I had spent 4 weeks recovering from a surgery that my son had declined to help make possible, where I had watched him weigh my eyesight against his financial comfort and find my eyesight wanting. And somewhere in the cold, clear light of that understanding, the fact of Michael's name on that line felt less like a historical artifact and more like an open door I had not known was there. He had the legal authority, if I became incapacitated, to make decisions about my medical care. He had the legal authority to manage my finances if I could not manage them myself. He had the legal authority, theoretically, depending on how things were structured, which I would need to discuss with Henderson, to access and direct the accounts I had just spent an hour discovering were worth considerably more than I had understood. I thought about the lake house in Michigan. I thought about Michael's voice on the phone, the flatness of it, the way the calculation had been so swift and so final. And I thought about something Lily had said, not recently but years ago, when she was maybe 25 and we were talking about something else entirely. A news story, I think, about an elderly man whose family had mismanaged his affairs. She had said, with the directness that was always her most characteristic quality, "The problem is that people assume family means safe, and it mostly does. But mostly isn't the same as always, and the ones who get hurt are the ones who never thought to check the difference." I had agreed with her at the time in the abstract, theoretical way you agree with things that seem true but do not yet feel personally relevant. I did not agree in the abstract anymore. I put the documents back in their folders, carefully, in the order I had found them. I replaced the lid on the banker's box. I sat at the table for a long moment with my hands flat on the surface and my thoughts moving in a direction I had not expected when I woke up that morning. Then I went and got Henderson's number from the address book by the phone, Gerald's handwriting, the same firm pen strokes, and I wrote it on the note card beside Lily's eye drop schedule. I was not going to call that night. It was Sunday. I was 2 days post-surgery and my eye ached and I was tired in a way that went beyond the body. But I was going to call Monday morning, first thing, and I was going to ask Henderson to explain to me in plain language exactly what those documents said and what they permitted and what, if anything, I could or should do about them. I went to bed at 9:30. I took my pain medication and my eye drops, and I lay in the dark and I was aware that something had changed in me over the course of that evening, not dramatically, not with any particular emotion attached to it yet, more like a shift in posture, the way you straighten up when you realize you have been hunched over without noticing. I had spent a lifetime in a posture of trust, of assumption, of taking the people around me at their word and not looking too closely at the mechanisms underneath. It had served me reasonably well, that posture, and I did not regret it exactly. But I was 72 years old, and I had just learned that the person who would make decisions for me if I could not make them myself had recently demonstrated, with startling clarity, exactly what I was worth to him when weighed against his own convenience. That was not information I was going to file away. I closed my eyes. My left eye throbbed dully under its shield. Outside, a car passed on 4th Street and its headlights swept briefly across the ceiling and then were gone. I thought, Gerald, you would have known what to do about this immediately. You always knew. That was one of the things I relied on. And then, but you're not here, so I'm going to have to figure it out myself. It was not a comforting thought exactly, but it was a clear one, and I had learned over the past 4 years that clarity, even when it arrives carrying hard things, is better than the alternative. Henderson's office was on Commerce Street, a 10-minute drive from my house in a 2-story brick building that had housed the same small law firm for as long as I could remember. I had been there twice in my adult life, once to sign the original estate documents with Gerald, and once after Gerald died to begin the probate process. Both times I had sat in the same burgundy chair across from Henderson's desk and been grateful for the man's undemonstrative competence. He was in his mid-70s now, still practicing, though I had heard from someone at the library that his son had joined the firm and was handling most of the new client work. When I called Monday morning, it was Henderson himself who answered, which surprised me. "Evelyn," he said, and his voice carried the warm, slightly formal recognition of someone who has been your attorney for 30 years. "It's good to hear from you. How are you keeping?" I told him briefly about the surgery. He offered his condolences about the ordeal, his word, which I appreciated for its accuracy, and asked what he could do for me. "I need to come in," I said. "I need to talk to you about the power of attorney documents, both the medical and financial." A brief pause. "Of course," he said. "I can see you Wednesday afternoon if that works. 2 o'clock?" "Wednesday at 2, I said. That worked. I spent the intervening days doing what I had been told to do, resting, keeping the head positioning, administering the eye drops on Lily's note card schedule. My neighbor Helen came by Tuesday with a casserole and spent an hour sitting at my kitchen table telling me about her daughter's difficulties with a coworker, which was soothing in the way that other people's ordinary problems are soothing when your own feel large and complicated. I listened and made the right noises and ate the casserole, which was good, and felt, for the first time in several weeks, something approaching normal. But I did not tell Helen what I was thinking, what I was planning. I did not tell anyone, not even Lily. Not yet, and the decision to wait felt important even though I could not have fully articulated why. Maybe because I was still working it out myself. Maybe because I did not want anyone else's certainty to crowd out my own, which was still forming, still finding its shape. Wednesday at 2, I sat in the burgundy chair across from Henderson's desk. He looked older than I remembered, the way people look when you see them after a gap. The age that has accumulated between encounters suddenly visible all at once. But his eyes were the same, still attentive in that measured, unhurried way. I told him what I wanted. I wanted to understand the existing documents completely, what they permitted, what they did not. And then I wanted to know my options for changing them. He did not react to this the way I had half expected him to, which was with concern or surprise or a lawyer's instinctive caution about family matters. He listened and nodded and then pulled out the copies of the documents he had on file and went through them with me, section by section, in plain English. What he confirmed was what I had suspected. Under the existing durable power of attorney, Michael, as the named successor agent, would have broad authority over my financial affairs and my medical decisions if I were determined to be incapacitated. The standard was intentionally broad, designed to give the agent the flexibility to act in the principal's best interests across a range of situations. "And can I change it?" I asked. "At any time," Henderson said. "While you have legal capacity, and you clearly do, you can revoke and replace these documents. You name new agents, we draft new documents, you sign them in front of witnesses and a notary, we file revocations of the old ones. It's not complicated. What would you need from me to get started?" He looked at me for a moment over his reading glasses. Not probing, more like the look of a man who has handled enough family situations over 50 years of practice to recognize when something has happened, when a decision like this is not coming from nowhere. The names of who you want to name instead, he said, and any specific instructions or limitations you want to include. I had thought about this over the 3 days since I found the box. I had thought about it carefully, the way I used to think about difficult parent-teacher conversations, going over it from multiple angles, checking my reasoning against the most generous interpretation available, making sure I was not acting from a place of pure emotion. I was not acting from a place of pure emotion. I had one person I trusted completely. One person who had demonstrated, without ambiguity, that she would act in my interest when acting in her own would have been easier. One person whose judgment I would trust with my life, and meant that literally, in the context of medical power of attorney, because that was exactly what the document was. Lily Hayes, I said. My daughter. Henderson wrote the name down. And for the financial power of attorney, same? Yes, same. With a secondary agent, if you think that's wise. It generally is. Do you have someone in mind? I thought for a moment. There was a woman from my years of teaching, a colleague named Roberta Chen, who had become a close friend and whose practical good sense I had trusted for decades. She lived 20 minutes away and had no financial interest in my estate. I gave Henderson her name. He wrote that down too. Do you want to name Michael in any capacity? He asked. He said it the way a professional asks a sensitive question, so neutral, leaving space, not pushing in either direction. No, I said. He nodded. He did not ask why, which I appreciated. He made notes on his legal pad in the precise, abbreviated script of a man who has taken notes for 50 years. What about your will, Dick? He asked. Do you want to review that as well, while we're at it? I had not originally planned to go that far, but sitting in that chair in that office, with the clarity that had been building in me since the night I opened the banker's box, I thought, yes, while I'm here, while I have the capacity and the will and the understanding that I have right now, in this specific season of seeing clearly. Yes. Yes, I said. Let's look at the will too. What followed was a long and careful conversation that I am not going to reproduce in its entirety because some of what we discussed is private and will remain so. What I will tell you is that I left Henderson's office 2 hours later with a plan in place, a set of new documents to be drafted, and an appointment in 2 weeks to return and sign everything. I sat in my car in the parking lot on Commerce Street for a few minutes before starting the engine. My left eye was still slightly blurred, the gas bubble doing its slow work. But I could see the street in front of me. I could see the sidewalk and the buildings and the afternoon light coming at an angle through the bare trees, and it was ordinary and familiar, and in some way I could not entirely account for, beautiful. I had not told Lily yet. I was going to tell her, soon, honestly, openly, the way I tried to do everything with her. But I wanted the documents in place first. I wanted the decision to be fully made and formally executed before I discussed it, because I had learned something about myself over the past weeks. I was capable, when the right person pushed back, of second-guessing things I knew to be right. And I did not want to second-guess this, because this was not about punishment. That is the thing I most want you to understand if you are listening. This was not about punishing Michael for one phone call, for one act of refusal, for one failure of the heart. This was about something older and quieter than punishment. This was about seeing, finally and without flinching, the shape of a relationship that I had been squinting at for years, distorting it with the pressure of hope and maternal love, and the desperate human need to believe that the people we have invested in will eventually deliver on that investment. This was about acknowledging that the man my son had become, cautious, self-protective, transactional, in ways he probably didn't even fully recognize in himself, was not the man I could safely entrust with the unilateral authority over my medical decisions and my financial life. It was not about anger, it was about honesty. It was about finally, at 72 years old, after a lifetime of looking after everyone else, deciding to look after myself. I started the car. I drove home through the familiar streets of Grover Falls in the late afternoon light. I pulled into my driveway, went inside and made a cup of tea and sat in Gerald's chair and looked at the bird feeder in the backyard where a pair of sparrows were working through the seed, with cheerful indifference to everything that had happened in the past 4 weeks. I thought, he would have understood. Gerald would have understood immediately. I thought, I wish you were here. I wish I could tell you about it. And then, because wishing was not something I had much patience for anymore, I picked up my phone and called Lily. She answered on the second ring. "How's the eye today?" she said by way of hello. "Better?" I said, a little clearer. "Good. That's good." I could hear her moving around, the sounds of her apartment in the background, something being set down on a counter. "What's up?" "Nothing urgent," I said. "I just wanted to talk." A pause, then, "You sure? You sound like something happened." "Something did happen," I said. "But it's okay. I'll tell you about it when I see you." "When are we talking? This weekend?" "This weekend works," I said. "Come for dinner Saturday. I'll cook." "You're not supposed to be doing anything strenuous." "Lily, cooking pasta is not strenuous." She made a sound that was halfway between a laugh and a sigh. "Fine, Saturday dinner. I'll bring wine." "Bring the good kind." "When have I ever brought the bad kind?" I laughed, which surprised me slightly. It was the first time I had laughed in what felt like a long time, and it felt like something loosening, something that had been held tight releasing its grip by a degree. "Saturday," I said. "I'll see you then." I hung up the phone and sat in the quiet house and felt, carefully, and without drama, the specific sensation of being a woman who had made a decision, not the relief of having it behind her. The documents weren't signed yet, and between now and the signing there were still things that could happen, conversations that would eventually need to happen. A son who did not yet know that the ground had shifted beneath him, but the decision itself was made. Clear, solid, mine. Outside the light was fading, the sparrows had gone, the bird feeder hung still in the quiet air of the backyard, and the street beyond the fence was settling into early evening, and somewhere in Columbus, a man who thought he knew the shape of his inheritance was sitting in his house without knowing that the map had changed. Saturday came with the particular quality of a late May morning in Ohio, cool enough in the early hours to still feel like spring, warm enough by noon to remind you that summer was not far off. I had slept better the night before than I had in weeks, which I attributed to the quiet satisfaction of having made a decision and committed to it. Not happiness exactly. More like the specific rest that comes when you have stopped fighting yourself. I made pasta sauce from scratch, the way Gerald had taught me. Slowly, with canned San Marzano tomatoes and a good pour of olive oil and more time than most people think it needs. Gerald had been the cook in our marriage, technically, but I had absorbed enough over 35 years of watching him that I could reproduce most of his recipes with reasonable accuracy. The kitchen smelled like garlic and simmered tomatoes by the time Lily knocked on the front door at 6:15, which was 15 minutes later than we had said and earlier than I had actually expected. She came in with a bottle of red wine under one arm and a small potted plant under the other, a rosemary bush and a terracotta pot, the kind that could be kept on a windowsill. "For the kitchen," she said, handing it over. "I know you had one and it died last winter." "How do you remember that?" "You complained about it for 2 months." I put the rosemary on the windowsill above the sink and poured us each a glass of wine, while Lily stood at the stove and lifted the lid off the sauce with the comfortable authority of a person who has been welcome in a kitchen long enough to feel at home there. She stirred it, tasted it from the wooden spoon, and made a sound of approval that I recognized as genuine because Lily was constitutionally incapable of false enthusiasm about food. "It's good," she said. "You put the bay leaves in." "Gerald's recipe." "I know." She set the lid back on, carefully. "He always put 3. Most people do 2. I had not known she knew that. The small, specific knowledge of someone who had paid attention, to him, to the kitchen, to the rituals of a family she had come into sideways and made her own anyway. It caught me somewhere I wasn't braced for, and I turned back to the counter and busied myself with the pasta water so she wouldn't see my face doing whatever it was doing. We ate at the kitchen table, the same place we always ate when it was just the two of us. The conversation moved the way our conversations moved, unhurried, ranging, with the easy silences of people who do not need to fill every gap. She told me about a difficult week at the hospital, a patient situation that had resolved well but had cost her sleep in the days it was unresolved. I told her about Helen's casserole and the sparrows at the bird feeder, and the book I had started, one of Gerald's old ones I had pulled from the shelf on an impulse, a thick historical novel he had read twice. Halfway through dinner, she set her fork down and looked at me. "Okay," she said. "Tell me what happened." I had been deciding over the course of the meal how much to tell her and in what order. I had settled on all of it, in chronological order, without softening any of the parts that were difficult to say. Lily did not need softening. She needed the truth, and she could be trusted with it. So I told her about the banker's box, about the investment accounts, the amount I had found, the surprise of it, about the power of attorney documents and Michael's name on the successor agent line, about the specific cold logic of sitting at that table and holding those two things at once, the sum of what Gerald and I had built, and the name of the man who had declined to lend $4,000 of it to save my eye. She listened without interrupting, which was characteristic. Her face was attentive and very still. "And then I went to Henderson," I said, "Wednesday afternoon." Her eyes changed slightly. Something sharpened in them. "Okay," she said. "I've changed the power of attorney documents, medical and financial. I named you as primary agent." I paused. "If that's all right with you." For a moment, she didn't say anything. I watched her process it, watched her absorb it the way she absorbed everything significant, going quiet first, feeling the weight of it, making sure she understood what she was actually being asked before she responded. "Mom," she said finally. "You don't have to say yes," I said. "I understand if it feels like too much responsibility or if that's not what I was going to say." "What were you going to say?" She looked at me across the kitchen table, the remains of the pasta between us and Gerald's sauce still warm on the stove, and her expression was something I did not have a clean word for, layered and complex, gratitude and gravity mixed together in proportions that were about equal. "I was going to say that I am honored," she said, "and that I take it seriously, and that I will not let you down." The simplicity of it, the complete absence of performance. She said it the way she said most things that mattered, directly, looking at me without hedging. "I know," I said. "What about Michael?" "He's not named in any capacity." A pause. "Does he know?" "Not yet." She picked up her wine glass and held it without drinking. "When are you going to tell him?" "When the documents are signed," I said. 2 weeks. "I go back to Henderson on the 14th. She nodded slowly. "He's going to have feelings about it." "I expect so." "Big feelings." "Probably." She set the glass down. "Are you ready for that?" I considered the question honestly, the way it deserved to be considered. Was I ready? Ready was perhaps the wrong frame. I was not sure anyone was ever ready for a confrontation with their child about the fundamental terms of a relationship. But I was clear. I was clear in a way I had not been for a long time, and I had learned over 72 years that clarity, while not the same as readiness, was often the more important of the two. "I'll manage," I said. She looked at me for a moment longer, and then she nodded, once with a finality that meant she believed me. "Okay," she said. "Then that's what we do." We finished dinner. We did the dishes together, side by side at the sink the way we had been doing for over 2 decades, and we talked about other things. The novel I was reading, the rosemary on the windowsill, the follow-up appointment with Dr. Haskins the following week. Normal things. The texture of a life continuing. When she left at 9:30, she paused in the doorway and said, "Call me after you sign, okay? Right after." "Right after," I promised. She left. I locked the door and stood in the front hall for a moment, and then I went to bed and slept again, with the specific quality of a person who has stopped fighting the current and started swimming with it. The documents were signed on the 14th of May, a Thursday, in Henderson's office on Commerce Street. 2 witnesses, a notary and Henderson himself, who walked me through each page with the unhurried thoroughness that had made me trust him 30 years ago and continued to make me trust him now. I signed my name 8 times across 3 documents: new durable power of attorney for finances, new advance healthcare directive, and a codicil to the existing will that revised certain distributions. It took 45 minutes. When it was done, Henderson gathered the papers and shook my hand in the formal, old-fashioned way he had always shaken hands, A two-handed grip that communicated something serious was being acknowledged. "These will be filed and the revocation served in the next few days," he said. "Do you want to be the one to notify Michael Carter directly, or would you prefer we send a formal letter?" I had thought about this. "I'll tell him," I said. "He should hear it from me." "That's usually the better approach," Henderson said. "If he has questions about the legal specifics, he can contact my office." I drove home. I called Lily from the driveway, still sitting in the car. She picked up immediately. "Done?" she said. "Done," I said. A brief silence, then, "How do you feel?" I looked at my house through the windshield, the white paint, the porch, the hydrangeas Gerald had planted along the front walk that were beginning to bud for the season. 40 years of life in that building, everything I had built and lost and held on to and let go. "Like myself," I said. "I feel like myself." She made a sound that was not quite a word, but communicated everything it needed to. "Good," she said. "Call me after you talk to him." "I will." I went inside and made a cup of tea and sat at the kitchen table and picked up the phone and called my son. Well, he did not answer. I left a message, brief, neutral, asking him to call me back when he had a chance, that I had something I wanted to discuss. I said it was not an emergency, which was true, but I also said it was important, which was also true, and I trusted that the combination of those two things would prompt him to call within a day or two. He called the next morning, Friday, 11 a.m. I was in the backyard doing the light weeding that Dr. Haskins had finally cleared me for, the May sun warm on my back. "Hey, Mom." He sounded normal, slightly distracted the way he often sounded, but not guarded. He didn't know yet. "Michael, thank you for calling back." I straightened up and went to sit on the back steps. "How are things?" "Fine, good. Sandra and the kids are good. Jake had a soccer tournament last weekend. He's getting pretty fast." A pause. "How's the eye?" "Improving," I said. "The follow-up went well. Dr. Haskins says the reattachment looks good." "That's great, Mom. That's really good news." He sounded relieved, genuinely, and that small, genuine note of relief did something complicated to me. It was a reminder that he was not a simple person, that care and failure could coexist in the same person, that understanding the complexity of someone did not require you to be unprotected by it. "Michael," I said, "I need to tell you about something I've done. I wanted to tell you directly, rather than having you find out another way." A slight change in his voice. "Okay? I've been doing some estate planning since the surgery, reviewing the documents, understanding what's in place." I kept my voice even, calm, the tone of a woman reporting facts. "I've made some changes. I wanted you to know." "What kind of changes?" "I've revised the power of attorney documents, both medical and financial. I've named Lily as my primary agent." The silence that followed this was the longest silence Michael and I had shared since the phone call in April. Longer, actually. This one had a different quality than that one. Not the silence of a decision being made, but the silence of something being received, of a mind trying to process something that had arrived from an unexpected direction. When he spoke, his voice had shifted. The normal distracted quality was gone. "You removed me." "Yes." "From both." "Yes." "Mom." His voice was doing something I couldn't immediately name. Not quite anger, not quite hurt. Something between them. The emotion of a person who has been surprised by something they are not certain they're allowed to be surprised by. "When did you do this?" "I signed the documents yesterday, but I began the process about 2 weeks ago with Henderson." "Henderson." He repeated the name like he was confirming it. "You went to Henderson without—" He stopped, started again. "You didn't say anything. You didn't even mention you were thinking about this." "No," I said. "I didn't." "Mom, you're talking about removing me as your power of attorney. That's a pretty significant thing to do without any kind of conversation." I had prepared for this. I had known it was coming because it was the obvious response, the one any person would have when they discovered they had been removed from a position they had assumed was permanent. And I understood. I genuinely understood why it landed the way it did. But I also knew something else, which was that the conversation Michael was implying should have happened. The one where I announced my intentions in advance and gave him the opportunity to weigh in, was exactly the kind of conversation that would have been about managing his feelings rather than making the best decision for my life. "You're right that it's significant," I said. "That's why I thought carefully about it." Mom, I don't understand. Is this because of the phone call? Because of what happened with the surgery money?" "It's because of several things," I said. "The phone call was one of them." "One of them," he said it flatly. "So you're, what, punishing me? Because I couldn't lend you money one time?" And here's where I could have let the word punishing slide. I could have gone around it, softened it, let him frame it that way because it was easier than confronting the frame itself. I had done that before with Michael, more times than I could count. Let his framing of things stand because correcting it felt too much like conflict. I did not do that. "That's not what this is," I said. "This isn't punishment. Punishment is what you do to someone for a single mistake. This is what you do when you look at the full picture of a relationship and decide that the trust required for a particular role isn't there." A sharp intake of breath. "The trust isn't there. Mom, I'm your son. I know you are. I've been your son for 44 years. I come to Christmas. I call on your birthday. When Dad was in the hospital, I was there. I showed up." "You did," I said. "You have done those things. I'm not saying you haven't." "Then what are you saying? Because what it sounds like is that because I couldn't—" He stopped. I heard him move, the sound of a door, a room change, the same pattern as the April phone call, stepping away from the background. "Because I couldn't give you $4,000 one time, you've decided I can't be trusted with anything." "Michael." I kept my voice level, but I felt the thing underneath it, the old exhausted love, the complicated grief of seeing your child clearly. $4,000 for a surgery to protect my eyesight. You're my son, and you told me you couldn't manage it, and 2 months earlier you had put a deposit on a vacation property. I paused. "I'm not angry about the money. I want you to hear that. I'm not telling you this because I'm angry." "Then why are you telling me this?" "Because you asked me to explain, and I'm trying to." I stood up from the back steps, moved to stand by the bird feeder post, Gerald's post, the concrete Lily had helped mix all those years ago. The money was not the point. The point was what the money revealed. When I was frightened and vulnerable and asking for help, the calculation you made was fast and it went one way. And I had to sit with that. I had to really sit with it. After the surgery, when I was going through your father's documents and I saw your name on those forms, I thought, this is the person who will make decisions for me if I cannot make them myself. This is who decides. And I could not, Michael, I could not reconcile those two things. Silence. "You bought a lake house," I said. "That's your business. That is completely your business, and I genuinely wish you joy in it. But you told me you were too financially stretched to lend me money for eye surgery. And the person who makes that calculation is not the person I can trust to make decisions about my medical care when I don't have a voice. That's not punishment. That's just honesty." When Michael spoke again, his voice was different. The defensiveness was still there, but something underneath it had shifted. Something was moving in him, some internal rearrangement I could feel even through the phone. "I didn't know it was that serious," he said. It came out smaller than his previous statements, less certain. "When you called, I didn't fully understand that it was that urgent. I told you the surgeon said weeks. I know you did. He stopped. "I think I assumed you had it handled. You always have everything handled. I think I thought you were asking, but that you didn't really need it, that you had options." I absorbed this. It was not a satisfying explanation, but I believed it was an honest one, and there is a difference between those two things. He had looked at me through the lens of the person he had always known me to be, competent, capable, managing, and had allowed that lens to distort what I was actually telling him. It was not a cruelty exactly. It was a failure of attention, of imagination, a failure to update the picture when the picture had changed. That didn't make it less of a failure. "I needed it," I said quietly. I need you to know that. I called you because I actually needed help, not as a formality, not because I didn't have options, because I was scared and I wanted my son. The silence that followed this was the quietest one of the entire conversation. Then he said, "Mom, I'm sorry." Not the reflexive, fast apology that people deploy to end uncomfortable conversations. This one came out slowly, with the specific weight of a person who is actually trying to say something rather than shut something down. "I'm sorry," he said again. "I handled that badly. He exhaled, a rough sound. Sandra and I had been arguing about money. The lake house decision had caused some tension between us, and I was defensive about it. And when you called, I think I conflated the two things. I think I was already on the defensive before I even heard what you were saying. That's not an excuse. That's just what happened, and I handled it badly." This was the most honest thing Michael had said to me in a long time, possibly the most honest thing he had said to me in years. And I sat with it. I did not rush past it, did not jump to reassurance the way I might once have done, because he needed to feel the weight of it, and I needed to hear it fully before I decided what to do with it. "Thank you for saying that," I said. "Does it change anything? About the documents?" I had expected this question. "No," I said. "The decision is made and it's the right one. That doesn't mean it's permanent forever, but it stands for now." Another silence. Then, "Is Lily—" He stopped, started differently. "Is Lily the primary agent?" "Yes." Something moved through the silence. Not rage, or if it was rage that had already begun to collapse inward, the way hot things cool when the heat source is removed. "She deserves it," he said, finally. The words came out flat, not generous, but true. He knew it was true even if it cost him something to say it. "She does," I said. I know I haven't been as close to her as I could have been, over the years. No. I didn't treat her badly. I want you to know I don't think I ever treated her badly." "You didn't," I said. "But Michael, not treating someone badly and actually showing up for them are two different things. Lily has been showing up for this family since she was 16 years old. She showed up for your father when he was dying in ways that I still think about. She showed up for me this spring in ways that I will never stop being grateful for. Not treating someone badly is a floor, not a ceiling." He was quiet for a long time after that, so long that I thought the line might have dropped. "Dad used to say something like that," he said eventually. His voice was rough at the edges now. "He used to say, being decent is the minimum, not the achievement." "He did say that," I said. "A lot." "I forgot." A pause. "I think I forgot a lot of things he used to say." I stood by Gerald's bird feeder post in the May sun and felt the specific sadness of this. Not for myself, but for Michael, for the ways that grief can hollow a person out, and the things they lose in the hollowing, the words and habits and orientations that a parent installs in a child that need tending to survive. "Michael," I said, "I love you. I want you to know that. None of this changes that. But it changes things." "Yes, it changes things." He didn't say anything to that. "What I need from you," I said carefully, "is not an apology. I've heard the apology and I accept it. What I need is something different, and it's harder, and I can't ask you to do it. I can only tell you what it would mean if you chose to." "What is it?" "I need you to actually see me," I said. "Not the idea of me you've had since you were 20 years old, where I'm the woman who manages everything and doesn't really need anything. Me as I am now, 72, living alone, with medical stuff that is going to continue to require attention, with a life that is still a life worth being part of. I need you to see that person and decide whether you want to be present for her. Not out of obligation, not because of what it might or might not mean for what happens when I'm gone, because she's your mother and she's still here and there's still time." I heard him breathe. "That's all I'm asking," I said. Another long silence. When he spoke, his voice had changed again, something in it that I had not heard from him in a very long time, something younger and less armored. "Can I come see you?" he said. "Next weekend. Can I drive out?" I had not expected this. I had prepared for anger, for negotiation, for the various defensive maneuvers I had seen Michael deploy over the years when something challenged his sense of how things stood. I had not prepared for this, for the stripped-down directness of it, the question without strategy behind it. "Yes," I said. "Come for lunch, Saturday." "Just me," he said. "Not Sandra, not the kids, just me. Is that okay?" "That's fine." "Okay." A pause. "Okay, I'll be there." We said goodbye, and I hung up and stood in the backyard with the phone in my hand and the May sun on my face, and I stood there for a while without moving, feeling the shape of what had just happened. It was not resolution, it was not reconciliation. It was something earlier than both of those things. A door that had been stuck for a long time finally moved on its hinges. Whether anything walked through it remained to be seen. I called Lily. She picked up on the second ring. "How did it go?" "He's coming next Saturday," I said. A surprised silence. "To the house?" "To the house, just him." "Huh." She said it the way she said things when something had surprised her, but she was still processing whether the surprise was good or bad. "How was the call?" "Hard," I said. "Honest." He apologized. Was it a real apology? I thought about it, about the slow weight of his voice, I think I conflated the two things, and I handled it badly, and Dad used to say something like that. "Yes," I said. "I think it was." "Okay." Another pause. "Are you okay?" "I'm okay," I said, and then because it was true and Lily deserved the full truth, "I'm sad. It's sad. The whole thing is sad, but I'm okay." "Yeah," she said quietly. "It is sad." We sat on the phone in a comfortable silence for a moment, the way we did sometimes when words had run out, but neither of us was ready to hang up. "The rosemary's doing well," I said eventually. "Yeah?" "On the windowsill. It's getting some sun." "Good. Water it every few days, not too much, but rosemary hates wet feet." "I know how to water a plant, Lily." "You killed the last one." "That was a different kind of plant." "It was rosemary, Mom." "It was a different rosemary." She laughed, genuine, easy, the kind of laugh that comes out of a person when they are actually caught off guard by something funny. I smiled at the backyard, at the bird feeder, at the hydrangeas budding along the side fence. "I'll be careful with this one," I said. "Good," she said. "That's all I'm asking." He arrived the following Saturday at 11:50, 10 minutes before noon, which meant he had timed it carefully. Not late, not awkwardly early, an exact and deliberate on-time arrival that told me he had been thinking about it. He drove himself, the silver sedan he had been driving for 3 years, and he parked in the driveway in the spot Gerald used to park, and came to the front door without sitting in the car first, which I had half expected him to do. I opened the door before he knocked. I had seen him from the kitchen window. He looked tired. That was the first thing I noticed. Not the normal work tired that I associated with Michael, but something deeper, a fatigue that sat behind his eyes, the look of a person who had not been sleeping well. He was wearing a flannel shirt, the kind he wore when he wasn't working, and he hadn't shaved, and the stubble was more gray than I remembered. He's getting old, I thought, with a start. My son is getting old. "Hi, Mom," he said. "Hi," I said. "Come in." He came inside and stood in the front hall, looking at the house the way people look at a place they have not visited in longer than they meant to. Taking inventory. Noting what had changed and what hadn't, the way you notice those things in a place that used to be the fixed center of your world and is now something you visit. "It smells the same," he said. "Garlic," I said. "I made soup." He looked at me. And something in his face, some configuration of fatigue and intention and whatever work he had done privately in the week between our phone call and this moment, was different from what I was used to seeing from him. Less defended, more present. "Can I—" He stopped, looked at the floor briefly, then back at me. "Can I hug you?" I looked at my son, 44 years old, gray in his stubble, tired behind the eyes, standing in the front hall of the house he grew up in, asking if he could hug his mother. I thought about the $4,000, and I thought about the phone call, and I thought about what he had said on Friday about conflating things, about being on the defensive, about forgetting what his father used to say. I thought about the fact that he was here, that he had driven 40 minutes on a Saturday morning to stand in this hallway and ask that question. I stepped forward and hugged him first. He was taller than me and broader across the shoulders than he used to be, the way middle-aged men get. And he hugged me back with both arms and held on in a way that surprised me. Not the brief, polite embrace of our recent years, but something that lasted, something that had some weight behind it. We stood like that in the front hall for a moment that was longer than either of us probably planned. Then he stepped back and his eyes were wet, which he clearly had not planned for and which he was handling by looking at the ceiling briefly and clearing his throat. "Sorry," he said. "Don't apologize," I said. "Come have soup." We sat at the kitchen table. The same table, always the same table, the table that had held so many conversations over so many decades, good and bad, and ordinary and extraordinary. And I served the soup, and we ate. And for the first 15 minutes or so, we talked about the kids, about Jake's soccer, and his younger sister Emma's obsession with a book series I had never heard of. And it was careful and somewhat stilted, the conversation of two people edging toward a harder one. He brought it up himself, which surprised me. "I've been thinking," he said between spoonfuls, "about what you said on the phone, about seeing you as you actually are instead of some idea I've had." "Yes. I think I've been doing that for a long time. Not just with you, with a lot of things." He set his spoon down, looked at the table. "Sandra said something to me a few years ago. She said I had a tendency to decide how things were, and then just continue operating on that basis even when things changed. And I got defensive about it, but I think she was right." "She usually is," I said. A faint smile. "Yeah, she usually is." The smile faded. "I didn't take the surgery seriously enough because I'd decided you always managed, because you always had. But I didn't check. I didn't ask. I just assumed the old pattern still applied, and I was wrong." He looked up. "I was wrong, Mom, and I should have just said that first on the phone in April instead of the payment plan thing, the assistance programs thing." He said it with a grimness that told me he had thought about those suggestions and did not think well of them, in retrospect. "It hurt," I said. Not accusingly, just as a fact. "It hurt." I know it did. Not just the refusal, the quickness of it, the way you went to alternatives so fast. It felt like you'd already made the decision before I finished the sentence. He absorbed this without flinching, which was something. "I don't know what it would have taken," I said, "for you to have said yes. I don't know if it was ever on the table, and I talked myself into it being possible. But I needed to believe it was possible from you, and now I know something I didn't know before, and I can't unknow it." "I understand," he said, and then, "Is there anything I can do?" It was the right question. Not "can this be fixed?" or "can you change the documents back?" or anything that made the conversation about him and what he stood to recover. Just, "Is there anything I can do?" The question a person asks when they have genuinely arrived at the place where their own interests are not the primary concern. "Come around more," I said. "That's what I need from you. Call more. Visit more. Not because of what's in my will or what the documents say, because I'm your mother and I'm 72 and I'm not going to be here indefinitely, and there are things I would like to have from you before that's not possible anymore." I held his eyes. "Your actual presence. That's what I need." He nodded slowly. "Okay," he said. "Okay. I can do that." "Can you? Really?" "Yes," he said, not quickly. "Yes, Mom. I can." We ate the rest of the soup. We washed the bowls together at the sink, side by side, and he was quiet but present in a way I was not used to from him. No phone out, no checking the time, just standing at the sink and drying the bowls with the dish towel and being there. Afterward, we sat on the back porch, the two of us, with coffee, and he looked at the backyard for a while without speaking, and then he looked at the bird feeder post and said, "Dad put that in when I was in college. I came home one break and it was just there." "He put it in that spring," I said. March. I used to watch the Cardinals from this window when I was a kid. I don't know why I'm thinking about that. Because he's everywhere in this yard, I said. Michael looked at the post for a moment. Yeah, he said softly. He is. We sat with that. The May afternoon settled around us, and somewhere in the neighbor's yard a dog was barking at something, and a cardinal, the same one I had been watching for weeks, or a different one I still could not know, appeared at the feeder and went to work with industrious attention. Michael watched it for a while. He would have been so angry at me, he said. Yes, I said. He would have. And then he would have told me to fix it. Yes, he would have done that too. My son sat beside me on the back porch with his coffee cup in both hands, looking at his father's bird feeder, and did not say anything for a long time. I did not fill the silence. Some silences are not meant to be filled. Some silences are the sound of a person doing necessary internal work, and the kindest thing you can do for them is stay present and quiet while it happens. The cardinal finished with the feeder and flew off. The afternoon continued. The coffee went cold. Eventually Michael said, "Can I come back next Saturday?" "Yes," I said. "You can come back next Saturday." And I meant it. Not as forgiveness exactly, not yet. Forgiveness was a longer road than one lunch, and I had learned enough about myself over the past weeks to know that I was done offering it prematurely, done treating the performance of reconciliation as the substance of it, but as an open door, a beginning, a first step on a road that might, with enough time and enough actual showing up, lead somewhere real. He left at 3:30. I watched his car back out of the driveway and turn onto 4th Street and disappear, and then I stood in the front doorway for a moment with the afternoon quiet around me. Something had shifted, not resolved. I want to be clear about that, because easy resolution is a lie, and I was done with comfortable lies. But shifted. The way a house settles after a storm, finding its new configuration, adjusting to what has been moved. I went inside. I watered the rosemary on the windowsill. I sat in Gerald's chair and looked at the backyard in the afternoon light, and I thought about my son and my daughter and the man whose chair I was sitting in and the life I had built and the life I was still building, and how strange and hard and occasionally, in spite of everything, still beautiful it was. I was not finished. That was the thing I kept coming back to. At 72, after the surgery and the documents and the conversations and all of it, I was not finished. There was more road ahead of me, and I intended to walk it clearly, with my eyes open, knowing who was beside me and why. That was enough. For now, in the quiet of a Saturday afternoon, with the cardinals somewhere in the yard and the rosemary on the sill and everything still unresolved and everything still possible, that was enough. Michael came back the following Saturday, and the Saturday after that. I want to be honest with you about how that felt, because it would be easy to describe it as purely good, as the warm, uncomplicated return of a son who had learned his lesson, and that would be a cleaner story than the one I actually lived. The truth is messier. The truth is that his arrival each week carried with it a complicated mixture of things that I had to sit with separately before I could experience them together. Genuine warmth, residual wariness, the specific grief of understanding that you are building something that should have been built 20 years ago and was not, and the time lost in between is simply gone. It does not come back. You cannot recover it. You can only decide what to do with what remains. But he came. That was the thing. He came when he said he would come, and he did not come empty-handed in the way that people sometimes arrive bearing gifts as substitutes for themselves. He came with his actual attention, which was what I had asked for and what I was learning to recognize as the more valuable currency. The third Saturday, he helped me clear out the garage. Not because I asked him to. I had been intending to do it for 2 years and had not gotten around to it, but because he walked through it on his way to get a glass of water and came back and said, "Mom, do you want to deal with this?" I could help. Gerald's garage was a specific kind of time capsule. Fishing equipment he had used twice, power tools in various states of functionality, a workbench along the back wall with things on it that I could not immediately identify, but that I knew had meant something to him because he had arranged them with the careful attention he gave to things that mattered. Old paint cans. A bicycle that had belonged to Michael when he was 11, still hanging from hooks on the ceiling as though it was waiting to be ridden again. We spent 4 hours in there. We sorted and consolidated and made a pile for donation and a pile for disposal, and somewhere in the third hour, Michael lifted the bicycle down from the ceiling hooks and held it for a moment with an expression I was not going to comment on. "I remember this," he said. "You rode it every day for 2 years, and then stopped cold when you turned 13 and never looked at it again." "Yeah." He turned it over in his hands, checking the tires, which had long since gone flat. "Dad kept it up here all this time. He kept everything." Michael set the bicycle in the donation pile and then stood there for a moment with his hand on the handlebars, not quite letting go. Then he did let go and turned back to the workbench and kept working. We didn't talk about anything significant that afternoon. We talked about the stuff in the garage, what it was, what to do with it, and we talked about Jake's upcoming school year and a movie Michael had seen that he thought I might like. And the conversation was surface level and ordinary, and yet it was not nothing. It was the kind of ordinary that only exists between people who are willing to be in the same space without a performance attached to it. That kind of ordinary is not actually ordinary at all. It is rare, and it costs something, and he was paying it. When the garage was done, he stood in the driveway looking in at the result. Clean concrete floor, organized shelves, Gerald's workbench preserved as it was because I asked him to leave it, and he looked satisfied in the way that men look satisfied after physical work, a simple, uncomplicated satisfaction that made him seem younger. "You should have a yard sale," he said. "Some of this stuff is worth something." "I'm not running a yard sale." "I could help." "Michael, I'm 72 and I just had eye surgery. I am not spending a Saturday morning haggling over your father's fishing rods." He laughed. It was the first time I had heard him laugh in my presence in a long time, genuine and unguarded. It was a good sound. It was Gerald's laugh, slightly. The same rhythm, the same quality of surprise inside it, as though amusement had arrived faster than expected. "I could do it," he said. "You sit on the porch and I'll do the haggling." "That I would consider," I said. We did not end up doing the yard sale, but the offer was real and I knew it, and I filed it in the place where I keep things that matter but don't need to be spoken about again. Dr. Haskins' final major follow-up was in late July, 12 weeks after the surgery. I drove myself, which was itself a small piece of evidence of how far things had come. I had not driven at night for 8 weeks post-surgery, had been careful about distances and glare and all the specific cautions that came with recovering vision. By July, I was driving again with something close to normal confidence, and the act of pulling into the parking lot at the medical center alone, without Lily driving me, felt like a quiet milestone. He examined my eye with the systematic attention I had come to associate with him, asked me questions, had me read from the chart. When he was done, he sat back and removed his magnifying lens, and looked at me with the neutral before delivering news expression I had learned to read over the months of our acquaintance. "The retina is fully stable," he said. "The reattachment has held. There's some mild permanent change in your central acuity in that eye. We expected that, but it's less than I anticipated, frankly. Your visual field is intact. The risk of recurrence is low if we manage the underlying diabetes, which you're already doing." He paused. "Evelyn, honestly, given where you were in April, this is a very good outcome." I had prepared to feel relief. What I actually felt was something larger and harder to name. Not just relief, but a kind of deep, cellular gratitude for the ordinary, for the ability to sit in this chair in this office and read the letters on the chart and see Dr. Haskins' face clearly and drive myself here in the July morning sun. Things I had done 10,000 times without giving them a second thought. Things I had come very close to losing. "Thank you," I said, "for what you did." "You came in at the right time," he said. "That matters." I thought about what it had taken to get there. The phone call that failed, the check on the kitchen table, Lily in the recovery room 4 hours and 11 minutes, a granola bar, and a bad plastic chair. I thought about all of it, the whole chain of events, and I thought about how strange it was that the worst phone call of my year had set in motion everything that followed, every clarification and every reckoning and every rebuilding, and that the rebuilding would not have been possible without the collapse that preceded it. I did not say any of that to Dr. Haskins. I just thanked him again and scheduled the next annual check and drove home in the July sun with the windows down. Summer moved through Grover Falls the way it always did, slowly at first and then suddenly fast, the way you don't notice time passing until August arrives, and you realize June was only a moment ago. The hydrangeas along the front walk bloomed fully, great heavy blue heads that Gerald had always been disproportionately proud of, and I cut some and put them in a vase on the kitchen table and sat with them in the mornings with my coffee and felt, cautiously and without demanding that it last, something approaching peace. Lily came most weekends, not because anything required it. The surgery was behind us, the documents were signed, the acute crisis had passed. She came because she wanted to, which I had learned over the years was the only reliable foundation for any relationship. Want, freely given, regularly renewed. Not obligation, not guilt, not the accumulated weight of expectation. Just, I want to be here, so I am here. She brought groceries sometimes, and sometimes she brought nothing except herself and her book. And we would sit on the back porch in the summer evenings and read in companionable silence. And occasionally one of us would say something about what we were reading, and the other would respond, and the conversation would meander for a while, and then return to the comfortable silence, which was its own language, its own closeness. One evening in late July, she was sitting across from me on the porch, her feet tucked up under her the way she sat when she was relaxed, and she was reading her novel. She had finally decided she liked it, around page 200. And I was watching the yard go golden in the evening light, and she said without looking up from the page, "Can I ask you something?" "Of course." She looked up. "Do you regret any of it? The documents, the conversations? Any of it?" I did not answer immediately. She was asking a real question, and it deserved a real answer. "No," I said, "but I've thought about whether I should." "What did you decide?" "That regretting a correct decision because it was painful is a kind of self-punishment I'm too old for." I looked at the yard. What I did was right, for me. For my actual life, the one I'm actually living. It cost something, it changed things, but it was right. She nodded slowly. "Do you think Michael will sustain it?" she asked. "The coming around." Another real question. I thought about the garage, about the bicycle in his hands, about the laugh that sounded like Gerald. "I don't know," I said honestly. "I think he wants to. I think he's working at it. But wanting to change and actually changing are different projects, and change is slow, and I've been wrong about Michael before." I paused. "I'm watching. I'm not deciding in advance." "That's probably the right position. It's the only one that's honest." She went back to her book. The evening settled. Somewhere in the neighbor's yard, a lawnmower started up and then stopped. The cardinal appeared at the feeder. It appeared most evenings now, reliably enough that I had begun to think of it as a specific individual, which I knew was probably not scientifically defensible, but which felt true anyway. "He came every Saturday for 6 weeks, I said. Lily looked up. She knew I meant Michael. "I know," she said. "You told me." "I'm telling you again because I want you to know I noticed. I counted." I met her eyes. "He's trying." She held my gaze for a moment. "I know," she said again, more quietly. Whatever she felt about Michael, and she felt things about him, complex things, layered over 20 years of peripheral coexistence, she kept mostly to herself, which was a generosity she had always extended to me even when it cost her. "If he keeps trying," I said, "I'd like you two to try too, when you're both ready. Not forced, not artificially, just try." She was quiet for a moment, then, "Okay," she said, "when we're both ready." That was enough. I did not push for more than that. In August, I did something I had not done in 4 years. I drove to the cemetery. I had avoided it since Gerald's funeral, which was a fact I am not proud of, but which was true. I had told myself various things over the years about why. Too busy, too painful. It didn't matter because he wasn't there anyway in any sense that counted. And all of those things were partially true and partially a cover story for the simpler truth, which was that I was not ready. That going there meant something about the permanence of his absence that I was not fully prepared to look at directly. But July's clear vision seemed to require it. Not because I owed it to Gerald. I don't think we owe the dead our grief. I think we grieve for ourselves, for the living, for the shape of the absence in our own lives. But because I was different now than I had been in those first years, and I wanted to go as the person I was now, the person I had become in the months since April, the person who had sat at a kitchen table with a banker's box and a legal pad and decided to stop being smaller than the life she was actually living. I went on a Tuesday morning in early August. The cemetery was on the east side of Grover Falls, a quiet municipal ground with old trees that kept it cool even in August. Gerald's grave was in the section near the east wall, which I had chosen because of the oak tree nearby, because Gerald had loved trees in a specific, almost personal way. He knew their names, pointed them out on drives, insisted on planting a particular kind of maple in the backyard of every house we ever owned. I brought the crossword puzzle. The Sunday one I hadn't finished, the one we used to do together, in pen, and I sat on the small bench near his headstone and I worked on it and I talked to him, which I felt only slightly ridiculous doing because I had decided that ridiculous was a category of concern I was releasing. I told him about the surgery. I told him about Michael and Lily and the phone call in the garage. I told him about Henderson and the documents and the banker's box with his careful handwriting on the index card. I told him that the investments he had built so quietly and methodically over 30 years had turned out to be exactly what he had intended them to be, a form of protection, a form of love expressed in the patient language of provision rather than proclamation. I told him I had found the 3 bay leaves. I told him I missed him every day. I sat there for a long time, and the oak tree moved in the August breeze, and the crossword puzzle stayed mostly unsolved because I kept stopping to look at the headstone and the name on it, Gerald Thomas Carter, and the dates underneath, and think about everything contained in the hyphen between those dates, all the ordinary and extraordinary accumulated substance of a life, compressed into a single dash, readable only by the people who were there for the living of it. When I left, I put the crossword puzzle under a stone at the base of the headstone. I don't know why. It seemed like the right thing to leave. None. The thing I have not yet told you is what happened with Sandra, Michael's wife, the woman who had said good investment about the lake house in December, who had been a peripheral presence in our relationship for 17 years, who I had never quite known, and who, I had always suspected, had never quite known what to make of me either. She called in September. Michael had been coming around for nearly 4 months by then, the Saturdays becoming a quiet, regular feature of my weeks, and this was the first time Sandra had reached out to me directly in longer than I could precisely remember. She asked if she could come to the house. Just her, she said. No Michael. She wanted to talk. I said yes, because I was curious, and because I had decided that curiosity was a better guide than caution when the cost of being wrong was simply a difficult conversation. She arrived on a Wednesday afternoon, which was her day off. She worked in hospital administration and had Wednesdays free. She was a trim woman in her mid-40s, dark-haired with the composed and somewhat guarded manner I had always associated with her, the expression of a person who has thought carefully about what they are going to show before they show it. She sat at my kitchen table and I made coffee, and she said, after we had covered the opening pleasantries, which we both understood as the formality they were, I owe you an apology. I looked at her. Michael told me what happened, in April, with the surgery, and he told me about the phone call. She wrapped both hands around her coffee cup. I knew he was going to say no before he made the call. I want you to be honest about that. We had talked about it. Briefly, he mentioned you might be calling, and we'd talked about the money, and I said I didn't think we should lend it. She met my eyes. It was my call as much as his. I had not known this. The information arrived with a specific kind of weight. Not the explosive kind, but the settling kind. The kind that reorganizes the landscape without drama. Why? I said. The question came out genuinely, without accusation, because I genuinely wanted to know. She was quiet for a moment. Because I was angry, she said, about something that had nothing to do with you, and I took it out on a decision that should have been simple. She looked at her coffee. Michael and I had been fighting about the lake house. I had wanted it, and he had gone along with it, and then he started resenting me for it. And I was already feeling like everything was my fault financially, and when you called, I think I was looking for a reason to hold the line somewhere. And that was wrong. It was wrong, and I've known it was wrong since about 3 days after it happened, and I didn't do anything about it for 5 months, which makes it worse. The honesty of it caught me off guard. I had not expected this from Sandra, had not expected her directness or the specific nature of her admission, which implicated her fully and did not hide behind ambiguity. "Sandra," I said, "thank you for telling me this." "You don't have to forgive me," she said. "I'm not asking for that. Michael has been different these past few months. He's trying in a way I haven't seen from him in years. And I think he's doing it because you told him the truth about himself, and it landed. And I think I didn't want to be the person in this family who knows they were wrong and doesn't say anything." She looked up. "I didn't want to let that be what I was." I thought about that, about the specific choice embedded in it, the harder choice, the choice to be accountable to someone you don't have to be accountable to, when no external pressure is forcing the issue. It was not a small thing. It did not erase April, but it was not a small thing. "The lake house," I said. "Are you enjoying it?" She blinked. It was clearly not what she'd expected me to say. Yes, the kids love it." "Good," I said. "It should be enjoyed. That's what property is for." She looked at me for a moment with an expression I could not entirely read, and then something in her face softened by a degree. Not dissolution. She was not a person who dissolved, but the specific softening of a woman who has been bracing for a blow and found that the blow did not come. "I'd like to bring the kids sometime," she said. "To visit, if that would be okay." "It would be okay," I said. "Emma likes to read?" "Obsessively." "I have books. Tell her she can borrow whatever she wants." Sandra looked at her coffee. When she looked up, her eyes were wet in a way that she was controlling carefully, and I recognized the effort and did not comment on it. "Michael said you were like this," she said. He said even when he didn't deserve it, you could still—" She stopped, pressed her lips together. "He said you always found the human part of the situation, even when you were angry." "I'm not angry anymore," I said. "I was. For a while. But I'm not anymore." "Why not?" I thought about it. Because anger was the right response to what happened in April. But it's September now, and things have changed, and I'm not interested in carrying something past its useful life. She nodded slowly. I'm going to think about that." "You should," I said. "It took me a long time to learn it. You're ahead of me." We finished our coffee. We talked, really talked, more openly than we had in 17 years of knowing each other, about the kids and about Michael and about what the months since April had looked like from where she was sitting, which turned out to be more complicated and more honest than I would have expected. Sandra was not the woman I had assumed she was. She was sharper, more self-aware, more willing to examine herself than the polished and composed exterior had suggested. People are almost always more than what they present. I know that. I have known it for 72 years, and still I am regularly surprised by it. She left in the late afternoon, and I stood on the porch and watched her car disappear down 4th Street, and I thought, well, all right then, not triumphant, not relieved, just thoughtful. Absorbing a development I had not anticipated and adjusting to accommodate it. The world, it turned out, was still capable of surprising me. I found I was glad about that. Summit, October. I want to tell you about one specific afternoon in October because it contains something I've been trying to understand how to say since I started telling you this story. And I think this is the moment it becomes sayable. It was a Saturday, middle of October, the kind of Ohio October day that earns the whole reputation of the season. Cool air with warmth still in the sun, the maples turning, the particular angle of autumn light that makes everything look significant even when it isn't. Michael had come as he had been coming. He had brought Jake and Emma this time, Sandra as well, and the house felt fuller than it had in years. That specific, comfortable chaos of children moving through rooms and adults talking over each other in the kitchen. Emma had found the bookshelves and was systematically reading the back covers of everything within reach. Jake had been in the backyard kicking a soccer ball against the fence for half an hour, with the focused repetition of a child who needs physical activity the way some people need silence. Sandra was in the kitchen with me, helping with lunch, and we were working together with the slightly effortful ease of two people who are building a new pattern and not quite comfortable in it yet, but committed to the building. And Michael was sitting on the back porch. I noticed him through the kitchen window. He was in the chair I usually sat in, Gerald's chair, brought out to the porch for the season. And he was watching Jake in the yard, his son kicking the ball with single-minded determination, and Michael's face held an expression I did not often see on it. Still, unguarded. The expression of a man who is actually present in the moment he is occupying rather than planning or calculating or managing how things look. And I saw, in that expression, just briefly, just a flash of it, something that looked like Gerald. Not physically. Michael looked like me. Always had. Same eyes, same stubborn jaw. But in the stillness, in the unguarded quality of it, in the particular way he was watching his son with a kind of reverent attention. That was Gerald. That was the thing Gerald had in abundance and had tried, I think, in his way, to give to Michael, and which Michael had somewhere along the way misplaced, and which was apparently still in there, findable, with enough digging and enough honest reckoning. I turned back to the stove. Sandra was slicing bread beside me and talking about something Emma had said in the car, something funny, and I laughed at the right moment and stirred the soup, and the kitchen smelled like garlic, and the autumn sun came through the window at its particular October angle and fell across the rosemary on the sill, the rosemary Lily had brought in May, which had thrived, which I had not killed. I want to stop here and speak to you directly, not as Evelyn Carter, widow of Gerald, mother of Michael and Lily, resident of Grover Falls, Ohio, but as the person who has been carrying this story inside her, who has turned it over and examined it from every angle, who has tried to find the right language for what it means and what it taught her. Are you still with me? I believe you are. I believe you are here because something in this story reached you. Maybe the phone call, maybe the check on the kitchen table, maybe the moment in the lawyer's office when I said a name out loud and the world rearranged itself around it. Whatever brought you here, I am glad you stayed, because I need to tell you the things I actually learned, not the things that make a good ending, the things that are true. The first thing is this: being related to someone is not the same as loving them, and loving someone is not the same as being safe with them. These are three separate conditions that can overlap in any combination, and the failure to distinguish between them is the source of so much preventable suffering in this world. Michael was my son. I loved him. And in April, in one phone call, he demonstrated that certain kinds of trust were not warranted. All three of those things were true simultaneously, and none of them canceled the others out. Learning to hold that complexity without resolving it into something simpler was the hardest work of my year. The second thing, older people, and I mean everyone past the age where the world stops deferring to you automatically, which is earlier than you think, have a right to protect what they have built. I am not talking only about money, though I am talking about money too, because money is freedom and autonomy and the ability to make choices about your own life, and anyone who tells you otherwise is usually someone who benefits from your not having it. I am talking about dignity, about the right to name your own needs, about the right to revise your understanding of a situation when new information arrives and act on that revision. I spent too many years treating my own interests as secondary to the feelings of the people around me, and I am here to tell you that this is not virtue. It is a habit that gets sold to certain people, particularly women, particularly mothers, particularly the old, as virtue, because it is convenient for everyone else. It is not virtue. It is self-erasure, and it helps no one, not even the people you are trying to protect. The third thing, forgiveness is not the same as restoration. I want you to hear this one especially, because it is the one that culture and story and every narrative you have ever absorbed will push back against. We are trained to want the complete arc, the wrong, the reckoning, the apology, the full restoration to what was before. And sometimes that arc is available, but sometimes, often, the right thing is a different shape. Forgiveness without the return of power, reconciliation without the removal of the new boundaries, love without the reinstatement of blind trust. Michael and I have rebuilt something. It is real and it matters, and I am glad of it. But he is not the successor agent on my power of attorney. He may never be. And that is not contradiction. That is an accurate picture of what we are to each other, which is still something, still meaningful, just not what it was and not what it might have been. The fourth thing, Lily. There are so many things I could say here. I could tell you about the check on the table and the 4 hours and 11 minutes and the granola bar and the plastic chair. I could tell you about the rosemary on the windowsill and the dishes at the sink and 22 years of a relationship that did not look like what the world expected a mother-daughter relationship to look like and was better for it. I could tell you about the coffee from Millfield Avenue, brought on purpose, gotten on purpose, because she knew what I liked and she went and got it. But what I actually want to tell you about Lily is simpler than all of that. Lily came into our family with nothing, with a garbage bag and a guarded face, and years of accumulated evidence that adults were not reliable and love was not a thing you could count on. And she chose slowly and painstakingly and at real cost to herself to let us in, to let me in. The choice to trust after being given so many reasons not to, was not nothing. It was in fact the bravest thing I have ever witnessed up close, and what she received in return was not perfect parenting. Gerald and I made mistakes. I made mistakes. There were things I understood too late and things I handled badly and conversations I should have had sooner. But we showed up. Every day, consistently, without conditions, we showed up. And she felt it. And it became the ground she stood on. That is the only investment that pays the kind of return I am describing. Not blood, not documents, not names on legal forms. The accumulated daily evidence of being shown up for. That is the currency of real love. It does not transfer automatically. It must be earned, renewed, practiced, all the way to the end. I have learned this the long way. The fifth thing, and the last, you're allowed to change your mind. About people, about arrangements, about the stories you have been telling yourself about your life and who is in it and what you owe them. You're allowed to open the banker's box and look at what is actually in it. You're allowed to sit with a legal pad and write down your actual options and act on the information rather than the comfortable fiction. You're allowed to call Henderson and walk through the documents and say a name out loud and mean it. You're allowed to protect yourself. You're allowed to be honest. You're allowed to require better from the people in your life and from yourself. You do not owe anyone your silence about what was done to you. You do not owe anyone the management of their feelings at the expense of your own truth. You do not owe anyone the pretense that things are fine when they are not, or the performance of a closeness that does not actually exist, or the surrender of your own dignity in the service of keeping a peace that was never really peace. I know these things now. I did not always know them. I am telling you because I wish someone had told me 40 years ago, and perhaps you are reading this, hearing this, at an age when it might actually do some good. It is December now. Christmas is 3 weeks away. My kitchen smells like the soup I have been making all week in preparation for the fact that people are coming. Michael and Sandra and the kids, Lily, and Lily's friend Daniel, who I have met twice, and who seems steady and decent, and who makes her laugh, which is all I require of anyone she brings into her life. The house has been decorated modestly. I'm not a person who goes in for excess at Christmas. Gerald used to say I put up exactly enough decorations to establish that Christmas was happening and no more. But there is a wreath on the front door and candles on the windowsill and a small tree in the living room that I put up myself last week with some difficulty and complete satisfaction. The rosemary is still on the kitchen windowsill. It has grown considerably since May, spread itself out into the space available to it, filled the terracotta pot, and then some. I trim it occasionally and use it in cooking, and every time I use it, I think of Lily standing at my stove lifting the lid off the pasta sauce, saying 3 bay leaves. Most people do too, and I feel the particular warmth of being known. Not perfectly, not completely, but genuinely, in the specific details that matter. I went to the cemetery last week. Not for any particular reason except that it felt right, the way some things feel right without requiring a rationale. I brought the Sunday crossword, finished this time, all the way through, in pen. I put it at the base of the headstone the way I had left the unfinished one in August, and I stood there for a while in the December cold with my coat pulled close, and I told Gerald about Christmas preparations and the rosemary and Emma's reading and Jake's soccer and the garage that was finally clean. I told him about Lily coming for Christmas, that she would be there at the table in the chair she had been sitting in for 22 years. I told him about Michael, about the Saturdays, about the bicycle in his hands. about the expression on his face watching Jake kick a ball in the backyard, the one that looked like Gerald. I told him I thought we might be okay. Not perfectly, not the way things are okay in stories that resolve cleanly and stay resolved, but okay in the way that real things are okay. With work ongoing, with a repair visible in the texture of it, with the knowledge that what has been damaged is not the same as what has been destroyed. I stood there for a long time. The December sky was pale and high, and the oak tree had lost all its leaves, its branches bare against the gray. And it was not a beautiful morning in the conventional sense, but it was present and real and mine. And I was there in it, seeing clearly, with my two eyes and whatever understanding I had managed to accumulate in 72 years of trying. I said, I think you would be proud of me. I think you would say, I finally stopped being so stubborn about asking for help. And then you would immediately make a joke about how long it took. The wind moved in the bare branches. I laughed. Out loud, alone in the cemetery in December, at the joke Gerald would have made if he were there to make it. And it was not sad, or not only sad, it was the particular texture of grief that has been lived with long enough to become something more complicated than sadness, something that contains the person you lost in a form that does not require their presence. I said goodbye and walked back to the car. Christmas morning arrives gray and cold, the way Ohio mornings in December almost always do. I am up before the light, the way I have been up before the light for 72 years, and I make coffee and stand at the kitchen window in the dark and watch the yard gradually become visible as the sky lightens. The bird feeder is full. I filled it yesterday because I knew I would be busy today and I did not want to forget, and the cardinals are already there, a pair of them, the red of the male striking even in the low early light, the female beside him in her quieter coloring, both of them eating with the focused efficiency of birds on a cold morning. I watched them for a while. At 9:15, Lily's car appears in front of the house, and then Michael's behind it, and through the front window I watch them get out of their respective cars at the same time and look at each other across the roof of Lily's Honda with the gap in the window seal. They exchange a few words I cannot hear. Michael says something, and Lily responds, and there is a pause, and then she smiles. Not a big smile, not a performance, just the specific small smile of someone who has decided something is okay. They come to the door together. I open it before they knock. Emma immediately heads for the bookshelves. Jake shakes my hand like a little man, which makes me want to laugh, and I shake it back with equal gravity. Sandra hugs me, and the hug is real, has the particular texture of a hug between two people who have said true things to each other and survived it. Daniel, Lily's friend, brings wine and a potted plant, a small lemon tree this time, and says, with the slightly nervous courtesy of a person still finding his footing in a new family, that he hoped this was okay, he wasn't sure what to bring. It's perfect, I said, and meant it, and watched him relax by a visible degree. The house fills with the sounds of Christmas, the specific beautiful noise of people talking at once, of Jake eventually being drawn into the backyard by Michael, who has apparently decided that kicking a soccer ball in December is a reasonable activity, of Emma reading in the corner of the living room with the concentration of a person who can make any room her own. Sandra and Lily are in the kitchen with me, and there is a moment, just a moment, when I look at the two of them standing on either side of the stove. One woman who married into this family and finally let her guard down enough to be honest in it. One woman who was chosen into it and who chose it back. And I feel something I do not have a clean name for. Fullness, maybe. Not perfection. Not the absence of everything that has been hard and broken and lost. But fullness. The particular feeling of a life that is actually being lived, not managed, not maintained at minimum viable level, not organized around the avoidance of pain, but actually occupied, with all the people and difficulties and repairs and renewals that occupation requires. Gerald is not here. That is still true, and it will always be true, and I have learned to carry it the way you carry the things that are simply part of the permanent landscape of who you are. But the table is full. That is also true. And when we sit down to eat and the food is passed and the conversations start, and Jake spills something that Sandra cleans up with the practiced speed of a mother who has been cleaning spills for a decade, and Emma asks me a question about one of the books she found that I was not expecting to be asked, and turns out to have a very interesting mind about it, and Lily catches my eye across the table and holds it for just a moment with an expression that says, "I see you. I'm here. We did this." When all of that is happening at once, in the warm and slightly chaotic kitchen of the house on Maple and 4th in Grover Falls, Ohio, 40 years of life in the walls and more ahead than behind me now, in some ways and less in others, I do not feel alone. I feel exactly as full and as seen and as known as I always wanted to feel, and never quite believed I deserved, and have spent 72 years slowly learning was not a matter of deserving at all. It was always a matter of clarity, of seeing clearly what was in front of me, of being honest about what I saw, of making decisions on the basis of that honesty rather than the comfortable fiction. The surgery gave me back my vision, but the year that led me to the surgery, the phone call, the check, the banker's box, the name I said out loud in Henderson's office, the Saturdays, the garage, the conversations, all of it. That year gave me something else. It gave me back myself. And if you are hearing this story and you recognize something in it, if there is a phone call you have been afraid to make, or a box you have been afraid to open, or a document you have been afraid to look at, or a name you have been afraid to say out loud, I want you to know this. It is not too late. The clarity is available. The decision is available. The people who will show up when the others do not, they exist. They are findable. They will bring you the right coffee from the right place and sit with you for 4 hours and 11 minutes in a plastic chair and hand you what you need across a kitchen table without asking for anything back. They are worth finding. You are worth the looking. That is the whole story. That is everything I know. Evelyn Carter, Grover Falls, Ohio.